G'day, Skyfarers. We are flying high and... Oh, geez, I've already butchered that intro. I was going to try something. G'day, Skyfarers. I was going to try to do something like fancy pants. We're still live, by the way. But g'day, Skyfarers. We are flying high with the new 2023 Battletome for Kharadron Overlords. I'm joined by Sky Captain Jeremy Veysseire. Jeremy is the Captain of Team America, former Captain of Team America, champion of the world, sure. AOS World Commissioner, top KO player, like everything Jeremy does. He basically lives in the mortal realms. But we're talking about this new book. We are talking about KO, and it's had some changes, changes that for most part, I really enjoy some of the changes, but you are someone who has spent way more time in this army. So we're going to talk about how the book has changed, evolved, things you like, things you don't like, maybe some considerations for the future. But before we get into the weeds, introduce yourself for people who don't know this grand champion.
Sure. So don't know me. I'm Jeremy Veysseire. I play AOS in North America, mostly United States. I play for Team America. I was their captain last year. This year, they call me the Admiral, which is just a glorified position for the guy who takes care of all the logistics. I'm also the commissioner for the AOS Worlds this year, and that just means I get to make sure we actually have an event to go to this year. And yes, I've played a lot of Age of Sigmar. I won ITC in 2019 before Gavin came and decided that he was going to own the scene. And then I let him have it. And then now we'll see what happens next year.
Charitable with your Aether Gold, letting Gavin in. I remember seeing pictures. I think I saw the picture of your award ceremony at the LVO a couple of years ago. But you have been an absolute just wrecking force on the scene. And when KO came around, I had to talk to you because absolutely, you know the army inside out. And you've got a great channel, by the way, for people who haven't seen Jeremy's channel. Link is down below. Go check it out. You do some really good content, not just for KO, but actually very strategic. And you look at the game a little bit differently. So highly recommend go check it out.
Thank you.
So let's talk this book. Let's talk KO. Before we get into like the actual update for the 2023, what got you into KO and why do you keep playing it?
Oh, well, I'm a dwarf player. So my real like Age of Sigmar competitive army was Fire Slayers. I played them since 1.0. That's one I won in 2019 with. And then I got into KO even when they first came out, but the first book was not what I wanted to play. We'll put it that way. And then when the second book came out, it was much closer to what I wanted to play. And we'll talk about this third book. And I'll say they keep making this book more and more attractive for me. We'll put it that way as the edition moves on. But yeah, for the most part, like I think there's something about the idea of steampunk pirate dwarves is the way I would describe them. It's just very unique. It's like Skaven for fantasy. It's just like, I don't think there's ever been a genre of a game that I codified a faction in this way. So I'm really down with the Kharadron Overlords. I can't wait to see what they do when they actually expand the model line a little bit bigger in the future. So yeah, that's what got me to it. Ooh, I can't tell. I'm still live and Coach is frozen. He's got the 1,000-yard stare right next to Galmaraz. So I can't tell if it's me or him. I hope it's him. Well, then, I'll say, Johnny, play me off, and let's cue the Family Guy scene here. No, while Coach comes back online, I will say that one of the big reasons KO has been such an important part of my gameplay is it's just an army that does things differently than the rest of the game. So if you played the game, let's say, for years playing Fire Slayers, which are a very basically linear type approach to the game, and you wanted to play something that played very differently, and KO was my solution to that. It allowed me to become I would say better player, but it taught me how to think about the game differently because I had to approach solving how to win very differently than Fire Slayers allowed me to. Like, for example, Fire Slayers were an army that, and especially in the 2019, 2018 era, where we like to call North America the activation war period. we wanted to. Hey, you're back. So I was giving trying to keep the audience hot and ready here. So I was going to finally say the army led me, basically taught me a new fresh point of how to play the game instead of just sitting in objectives and letting my opponents try to fight unkillable blocks of hurt guard. This army taught me how do I sequence things in a way where I can still get on points, even though I can't actually physically get on points without, basically losing my entire army. So, yeah, that's why I picked up KO in the first place. Are you live with me now? Are you back? No audio. Oh man, that's unfortunate. First time I come on the show, and then we have a crippling technical error.
We're good. Sorry,
We're
did I miss
back.
much? Because did you actually go through much? Because I can just restart the stream and we'll pretend this didn't happen. I'll cut it.
No, actually, like as soon as I noticed you basically had a frozen screen situation, I just kept talking about why I picked KO and went more into detail than probably most people wanted to hear.
Mate, you're an absolute champion. I thought I resolved the tech issue, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. But KO's always been an interesting army to me because it hasn't actually seemed like it seems on a surface an army that doesn't quite play Age of Sigmar the way traditionally it plays. But I think to your point, as the book has evolved, it is getting more and more like an Age of Sigmar army. But I always feel like it's missing just a little bit of melee support. And I think that's probably one thing that excited me the most with the frigates and the frigate change is I felt like while you didn't get any melee focused units, it did actually bring the melee to the game. And I'm like, all right, this is getting a little bit more attractive and spicy to me.
Yeah, the way I would describe previous KO books, it's like we are teleporting shooty, and now the new book, in my opinion, feels more like we are melee army with guns. Like that's how I would describe the book, and the difference between the two books is it feels more like you're enticed to go into combat than you used to be, because they gave us some massive frigate buffs, I guess, in that right.
So what else changed? So while we're talking like maybe at a very high level, unless you covered this already while my computer crashed, what's changed between the last book and the 2023 version? Like, has the playstyle changed? Has it just been a couple of tweaks that you've found? Like, what's your observation?
I think I broke it down to 3 specific categories. The shooting, while not necessarily being that much better, I will say it got better, but not in a weird way, like not in a simplistic way of looking at it. Like they didn't bump the Ren, they didn't bump like necessarily damage. What they did do is they made it more consistent. Like they made the shooting from all the boats more consistent. They made the shooting from the special weapons a bit more consistent as well. And so that's a big change. Like consistency is key in a shooting army. You don't want gambling mechanics because you could just literally lose the game because you didn't do anything. And then the other thing they addressed was battle tactics. In the previous book, we had a White Dwarf update that added some fairly easy battle tactics. And then this edition, they were like, hey, you know what would be even better? What if we made them even easier? So that was a major change in the book. And from those, and the last thing finally is combat. Like before it was trying to figure out an equational math to how to score the primary points. In this edition, it's more linear. Like you can just say, no, I can just fight. I can just engage. Like there's almost no penalty for fighting in combat now. Is the way I would describe it. Before that, it was a little hard.
Yeah, you never really wanted to be in combat. It was like a last resort. And even probably when I looked at the Sky Wardens and their ability to kind of yeet themselves out of combat with those bombs at the end, I'm like, okay, cool. You can get into combat, do the damage with the frigate, and then get out before you get hit back, or you can avoid some of the hit back because you just don't have the durability. You don't have the wounds. You don't have the tools to be able to sustain long combats. You can't grind.
Yeah, it is not a grindy army at all, 100%.
We will get into the rules in a minute, but I do want to ask you about, sorry, did I cut you off?
No, you're good.
I just wanted to call out one significant change, well, could be significant depending on how you want to look at it, is the removal of Aether Gold Is that something that you were annoyed about? Was that something that you're like, okay, like what was your take on that?
I can't say like so. If you notice me playing KO when I did win GTS with it, it was mostly a boat heavy army. So the gold I had available that mattered was maybe once or twice on an ironclad, and then the rest of the gold was kind of irrelevant. It was nice to have, but it was never a necessity. And now KO, you can still have a triumph. Like it's fairly easy with KO to be like 80, 100 points under and still be relevant in terms of model count. So you never really lost the other gold for the shooting phase that matters, basically, or whatever unit you're trying to do. So yeah, I don't think the other gold going away really took a bit nerf bad to the book. I think it's just it was already kind of a hard mechanic to use because of like things like the balloon guys didn't get it unless you played one specific sub faction. So if you had like 9 Enden riggers, you didn't even get a gold on them. I don't know. Yeah, I totally even forgot that rule existed in the new book. Like, I've already been playing the new book. I'm like, what is this rule you're talking about that is like engraved in stone in the prehistoric times?
But overall, you're feeling positive about the change. There has been changes. We'll go through like fly high, disembark. We'll go through all the different rules in a minute. But just at a very high level, you feel good. They're competitive. They're something that you would take to a tournament.
My personal feeling after playing it, I played them now 7 games in the new book. They're very good. They're very, very good. I still think they struggle against the Boogeyman, which is the Gits. I think, but in terms of that, they're a very good faction right now, and it just comes down to how easy it is for them to score, and how much more powerful they are in every phase of the game. Because before they were a shooting army that just used maneuverability to its advantage. Now it's an army that does damage in every phase of the game. So it's a very different game. It's a very different army now than you used to.
Yeah, it really always used to be like, at least maybe the play style for the opponents that I went into was always they would not take the first turn. They would go bottom of turn 1, fly high, shoot as much as possible, hope for the double turn, shoot some more as much as possible. And hopefully between that double turn, they either won or they will be able to, move around and avoid combat. And they've done enough damage to those key heroes, support troops, scoring, whatever it might be in the battle plan. And if they didn't win the double turn and I could have, screened, I could have sustained the damage, then I'll punch you in the face and you wouldn't be able to handle it.
Right. No, I think that those days of KO are going to be very different. Like, I don't think you're going to see those KO armies play that way anymore. I think, let's put it this way. I'm very biased because I play KO. So maybe take everything I said with a grain of thought. So, but like Enden Riggers and Frigate combos are like, they're nasty. It's like really nasty. I have yet to see a single unit that has basically been like, okay, this felt like I could tank this, at first, and you see face value, and then you play a turn against it, and you're like, no, this bloody sucks. Like, I really don't like this combo at all. So that's how my opponents felt after playing like the new KO a couple of times. It's like, this army is not like it used to be in terms of output and in terms of how it wins games. So it has its downfall, though. Sorry, interrupted you. Go for it.
No. And I'll bring up the rules in a second. But you notice that with the change to fly high, now that it's a command ability and not everyone can just fly high and have this concentrated attack, you've got to use movement in the game a lot more than you always have, which has make you look at your list a little different. And I've got to say, the frigate for me, and I am going to bring up the rules in a second, so I want to get into the actual rules, is when you look at the frigate before this book, it never really had a place. If you wanted cheap boats, you had the gun hauler. If you wanted the big boat and you had the points for it, you go the ironclad. And the frigate was always in this weird middle ground that you never really had a unique role for it. Now there are very defined lanes for all 3 of them, and I love that.
Yeah, in fact, I would argue, and I would even add that the ironclad got left in the dust after the frigate changes. And you're talking to a man who's been winning GTs of like 2 frigates and an ironclad for like a year and a half. So, like, trust me, frigates had a place. Everybody was undervaluing their place, I think, is the problem line, because the game's a much more linear place when you just had like 2 ironclads. You're like, okay, my army I'm going to pick this up. And then next time I'm going to pick that up. And then like when you have this very linear equational math, you're very easy to play the army. But then your job as you're the opponent to the KO army is like, well, how am I going to disrupt that game plan? Because it's very televised versus the new KO is low, like is not very televised at all, because the threat of it is very different than it used to be, effectively.
Yeah. Good question. I actually might bring this one up just to ask, and then we'll get into the rules. I haven't really thought about this from a KO point of view, because the mercenaries or the regiments of renown had dropped just after my Battletome preview. But have you given any thoughts to the order, the regiments of renown, the rune throng, the rune priest with iron drakes and hammers? No, whatever.
No, it's Longbeard. I think it's Longbeards. It's Longbeards, Iron Drakes, and Rune Priest. Yeah. I thought about the Barak Thring sub-faction, but the problem of, and this is me being like super conservative about rule interaction, they need to back the Barak Thring because it's unclear if you can actually get the prayer on the Allied Priest, because technically it's an allegiance mechanic, and allies don't get allegiance mechanics based on the core rule. So I'm assuming the Battletome supersede that, but it's also kind of like, are you sure? So we're going to play like as if they are. So that is a great renown battalion or whatever you want to call them for Barak Thring, because it gives you the priest you were looking for. It gives you like a unit that can basically hold an objective in your backfield, so you can commit your boats to whatever you're doing. And you still have Iron Drakes, which are still a fantastic unit, even in this, fast forward to today. So, it's a really good battalion.
And if you can't take the prayer, would you have the same feeling?
No, I think I'm making the assumption that you're able to take prayer, because if not, I think you're better off investing into more boats if you're not playing Barak Thring with that combo. If you're playing any other sub faction, just invest into more boats.
Yeah, I just wanted the decision tree. It's like, can I take the prayer? Yes, love them. No, I'd rather something else.
Yeah, if you're playing Barak Thring and you can take the player on that priest, yes, 100% is that's a great like allied like mechanic in that army.
All right, I've teased the rules a few times now. Let's actually bring it up. So let's go through. We're not going to go through line by line, because you've probably already got the Battletome by now, and I'm going to assume you've looked at mine or some other Aethercast review. You probably know the rules by now. So at a very high level, we'll avoid Skyports for a second, because I'll actually bring up the rules when we get to them. But as a very good player, a great player, a champion player, captain of the Mortal Realms, how do you look at embarking and disembarking? Is this something that you load your boats up to the moon, as many models as possible? Are there particular units you like to embark more than others? How do you look at these rules? Because as a new KO player, this can be quite overwhelming. Do I put things on the table? Don't I put them on the table? When do I take them down? Where do I put them down? Is it just to get them onto objectives and I drop? Like, how do I use these rules?
I really appreciated that they actually spent time into writing these rules versus just basically calling them the garrisons. So now you're in a situation, in a context, that units that benefit from fighting things in garrisons, like Sons of Behemoth, doesn't trigger anymore from fighting things inside your boats. But for the most part, they also actually worded them in a way where it made sense. Like, so we had this weird period of time for KO where when the last book came out, you could basically, it was kind of simple to embark and disembark. And then when the 3.0 rules came out and the garrison rules kind of changed a little bit, it made it like almost impossible to get a boat. So they had to even like fact it to make it so it's possible to disembark out of a boat in almost all situations. And now with these rules, they actually made it like super, it seems like a lot of verbiage, but it's actually not that complicated. It's literally, hey, do you finish a move wholly within 3 inches of a boat? Cool, you can get in the boat. When you disembark, did the boat move? Okay, if it didn't, you can disembark wholly within 3 inches. And then I thought that was very like they actually very streamline the way it interacts, and all the bonuses and limitations. I mean, the big one they have to actually clarify on is what the hell did they mean when a unit inside the boat finishes a move? When the boat finishes a move, does it count? The unit counts as making the same move. What the hell does that mean? Because there's no other rule in the game that explains like like gives you a context of what does that mean. So most players are going to think like, oh, it means if you retreat, you can't with the boat, you can't shoot the guys in that because it counts as retreating. Yes. But distance, like, is that a point of relevancy? Like, do you care? Like, there's all these things that, like, they kind of they could have expended on that one. But everything else in those bullets are very, very good and simple, I thought, from previous interactions.
So just to call out, folks, we are recording pre any FAQs. So some of these things that we might talk about, like this one, for example, may get clarified if you listen to this in the future. Hello, future people. But otherwise, you know, we're reading as we currently understand. So, you know, things might change. But as a experienced captain, like, how do you actually use these rules? Like, do you grab, let's say, a frigate, and if a frigate has I can't remember how much frigate can hold
12.
at this 12. Do you always load up each boat with the maximum amount of people? Is there particular units that you like to load up more than others? Like, how do you think about embarking and disembarking?
Sure. So let's talk a little bit like list design. First, I'll start with the biggest change from embarking that was from last edition is that the units inside the boat count as flying, which is a massive change because it means that overgrowth and certain the rules get basically, you know, you somehow not shoot through trees. So we'll put it that way. So some units like Thunderers, which were, you know, kind of nice to have in a boat, but now they're just like, you kind of always want them in a boat because nothing can really block line of sight other than the Galatian champion mechanic. And in terms of other units put in the boat, that was a big change. You couldn't even put engine riggers or sky wardens or the engine man dirigible suit inside the boat because of how the hitchhiking mechanic worked. But now that they can actually be in the boat, that's a massive upgrade for those units. And well, I mean, we'll talk more about those war scrolls later, but for the most part, it means that now if they're inside the boat, they at least have a +1 save, they're -1 to hit because they're just like in the defensible piece, but not being a defensible piece. They're less likely to get shot off in a mirror or less likely to get shot off in other shooting matchups. And it gives them that additional kind of like durability. If they do make a charge, you can choose, like, you know, if you're charging in an ironclad, they're like, cool, like they actually have a +1 save natively inside the ironclad, so it makes them a little bit more tankier. In terms of mechanically speaking, the units that we put in the boats are characters, Thunderers, and Rigger, Sky Warden, and then finally Arkanauts. Like, I mean, obviously we covered all the units here, but like it's by priority. It's by priority. Like this is the priority units you put in the boats. So, like all your characters, then your Thunderers, and then your Engine Riggers, then your Sky Warden, then your Arcanaut company. So that's how you fill up your boats first. So Arkanauts are usually hoofing it. If you don't have enough boats.
So it's fair to say that your heroes are on a boat.
Oh yeah, they're rocking it like Lonely Island in that song. I'm on a boat. That Chad pointed out. No, yeah, I mean like there's two archetypes I've been playing. There's the 3-boat frigate and 2 frigate list I've been testing. And when I'm running the 3 frigate build, there's usually 1 frigate that either has a unit but it always has a character in it because the boats still are not elite. So they can't really issue themselves command other than the 3 commands you have from your faction. So you still need a character inside boats. It feels like you always need a character at least inside a boat to maximize your value.
Which actually, let's actually continue that and actually talk about the those 3. So stick the code for a second. You've got those 3 Iron Sky command abilities. So Arcanaut Admirals can issue these commands as well as Sky Vessels can issue it to themselves. So you've got Combat Landing, Fly High, and Disengage. Some of these used to be on their war scrolls and some of them didn't, and they didn't cost you a command point. Right. So how did that change come about, and what are you thinking about with the new version of, so you've already mentioned having a hero in all the boats to make sure they can issue because you can't just run all admirals. I mean, You could, but you probably don't want to.
I mean, there's a really good synergy about running an admiral with the new JC mechanic leader or alpha leader, or whatever, the one that gives you three command abilities for one phase. So you technically, if you have 3 boats, you can fly high 3 boats of him for free, because you can give it to his flagship for free. So that's a nice little, you can still have the old cool fly high. You're rarely ever going to see that, but that is still an option if you wanted to go back to the days of fly high for 1 turn. But for the most part, combat landing was the blessing. Like, it was, I think every KO player was asking for combat landing for like years. If you played KO, you're like, be real nice if I could just move my boat and like disembark my unit and then like sit on a point. Be real nice. So combat landing was like the blessing from on high from Games Workshop, because all the other ones are really good, but they changed them enough to be like, you're in almost fly high, for example. Let's talk about fly high. Fly, you used to be able to do it in combat. You didn't even care. But now you can't even do it in combat anymore. So it requires you to retreat, which is, once again, the changes to this the embarking rules means if you retreat, the guys inside are retreating, meaning they can't shoot. So even if you fly high, guys inside can't shoot. Disengage. Disengage while the unit can retreat and shoot later in the turn, as well as the units inside. And so you now have like, this is now, they basically went back and forth, like saying, well, we don't want you to be anywhere on the table. We just want you to be close to anywhere on the table. You actually have to like think about it now, because frigates are like 12-inch movement, most likely 14-inch movement if you're playing KO. But for the most part, they're all these new abilities are interestingly, mechanically a little bit harder, but at the same time still very forgiving. So
yeah, and I think it's probably, as an opponent, one of the most frustrating thing was always flying high out of combat. Like, it grinded my gears, because like I couldn't pin you down, and then you like just move away, pew 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 again. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just running around getting shot at. And if I got double turned, like, it was just, that was often such an important element to the game. If I could win the priority, then at least I had a chance to get in combat, try to smash you, and hopefully soak up and unleash hell and still have some troops on the board. But now, you've really got to choose. If you want to get out of combat, you need to disengage or retreat. If you retreat, you can't fly high. There's a whole bunch of things now that KO people need to think a little differently to how they played a couple of months ago.
Yeah, and I will tack on to saying that they still view the option for being able to do that with a footnote. But the biggest thing that matters the most is that now, I will say that KO is not, because in your example, for example, Coach, you bring up, I would consider KO in the previous iteration as an NP army, it's just not enjoyable for your opponent. Like, you're just like, cool, you're playing a very different game than I'm playing, and it doesn't seem that what I do matters. Like, and now it does. Engaging KO boats matters. It has a real ramification to what they can do. And so, like, in that same, there is a sense of counterplay to a boat's work. So it's super, that I love the change. Like, for me, it's like phenomenal. I love the fact that they give us combat landing, which is basically solves a lot of the problems KO had in the previous iterations. And also they made fly high and disengage limited resources that are still good, but your opponent never feels like there's nothing I can do about this army. It just does what it wants. Like, there's no counterplay. So
yeah, and I think in the preview video, I mentioned you'll be playing more on the tabletop. Your boats are going to be moving around using their movement, as opposed to having to, because that was what happened in the past. You just fly high, you moved where you needed to move, as opposed to now you've actually think about your movement characteristic, where you want to be, and plan for those attacks with your range. But and I'm not saying this with negativity. It's just, I'm saying now that the book has changed, you need to think a little differently how you use your boats and your resources. And speaking of footnotes and resources, you've got your articles, your amendments, and your footnotes, which is a massive boost considering they used to be locked to your sub-faction, your Skyports. So how are you looking at this creative freedom of articles, amendments, and footnotes?
Well, you're talking to a man who didn't even play sub-factions in the last 2 GTs with KO. I was writing my own sub-faction so I could have my cherry pick of articles, amendment, and footnote previously. And so now, it's my play style, but like, I get a sub-faction of it. So it's really cool. So the way I look at them, specifically speaking, you have effectively, each section has, hey, do you want to play old school KO? Well, we wrote something for you in that section. Or do you want to play new KO? And then we wrote something for new KO. And then they wrote something like, well, if you want to play something different, then you still have that. That's how I classify each one of these rules. They're very much like play new KO, play old KO, play something completely different. It's the way I write each of those sections.
So let's go from the top. Do you have a favorite article, or what are the ones that stand out from you in your builds?
Yeah. Barak Urbaz is a faction we'll talk about later, but for me, two biggest winners out of articles are Master Disguise and Settle the Grudges. Master Disguise is 2 inches to sky vessels in terms of movements, and puts all your frigates to 14, your ironclad to 12, your gun haulers, I think, to 14 as well. And then Settle the Grudges is basically old school Ether Gold. You can think of it like old school Ether Gold, which is actually something I was using in my previous build from the command trade, which is translated now into an article. But you can think of it as like you're picking an enemy unit and you're like, I have permanent +1 to win against that, which is what you were using their goals most of the time for anyway, before they change it from 2.0 to 3.0. So my two favorite. Honor as Everything is very niche. It's a very niche article.
Normally, I wouldn't talk about the article or the rule that you didn't want to talk about, but I want to call out specifically the Honor as Everything, because take a step back from KO for a second. When you see 4-up rally, people lose their minds. You think about it when Chaos Warriors had it, you have Gits have it, you have, Beast of Chaos had it for a while. Like so many, Daughters of Cain has it, Fire Slayers has it. And you're like, ooh, 4-up KO. A lot of my troops aren't durable, so 4-up rally, like on the surface, seems a very attractive offer. Why wouldn't you pick it?
So that's why, I've talked earlier about like there's an old KO, new KO, and something else all entirely. Honor Everything is something else entirely. So if you're planning on playing, let's say 30 Arcanaut Company blocks, they can't go any boats. So they play a very different game. It's like almost like you could go super infantry heavy in KO and like bring no boats, and the army's still very functional. So you're doing something different. Right, and that's why I think they wrote that in there, because it helps that kind of build actually do stuff versus Master Disguise, which is more into new KO, which is, hey, you're playing Mad Max Fury Road and you want to get as fast as possible into your opponent's face, and then Settle Grudges is more of the old school, like, hey, you want Ether Golds? Well, we got the gold for you. So that's how I look at those.
Yeah, like if you're someone who's building Arcanaut, it's going to sit on a back objective and project power from like a castle, and you want to have 30. Yeah, I could see this potentially being useful for most people. You're right. Like I was just looking at the Ironclad. The Ironclad can take up to 22 Skyfarers, so you could only reinforce them once.
Right.
Is it worth taking that particular article for one unit that has 20 wounds? Sorry, 20 models? Probably not. Probably not in most cases.
I agree with that. That's how I looked at those articles, is the same way. Where am I going to use that one? Very rarely.
Yeah, like I just wanted to call out for especially people who are newer to the faction why 4-up rally isn't. It's not that 4-up rally is powerful. It's in other factions. 4-up rally means more. Bringing back Witch Elves, bringing up 60 Stabbers, bringing back other units. It makes a lot of sense. Not in KO. Anyway, amendments. What's your favorite amendments?
Same classification, old KO, new KO, something different. All right, we'll start with new KO, Prosecute Wars of All Haste, giving you one unit that once you return to your movement phase, you can run 2d6. Fury Road, once again, let's just go, something is going to go like an ICBM into your opponent's face. That's what it feels like. Trust your guts. Old KO, giving you basically reroll ones to hit for one. I actually like this rule. Really, I hate this rule so much because there's 40k versions of this rule that are written the exact same way. I have no idea if they mean that every unit gets one reroll or if your faction gets one reroll of ones. So I'm going to lean on you get one reroll once per your entire faction until they have like nuance clarify what they mean, because it's the exact same verbiage for master crafted weapons and master crafted whatever in 40k. So we won't talk about that game because it's not relevant. But Games Workshop, please be more consistent. Like if you're going to differentiate these rules, write them a bit more differently. And then always take away your own, which is something new, something different. Because it's just like, once again, we talked about this, like, hey, 30 Arcanauts, count as 2 models and objective. Sounds pretty good. Especially with 4-up rally. So it's very different in that regard.
What's the one that you would take, or what's the one that you would like the most?
Prosecute wars always. Fury Road all the way. Witness me scenario here. I really love that. Like that. And we'll talk about like more reason why as we talk about the rules, but that is like clearly my favorite in this amendment section.
It's interesting because Trust Your Guns is the one that kind of stood out to me the most, just because of the rerolls. Rerolls have been dropped from the game. It's very hard to get a reroll now. Right. And with the amount of shooting you've got, if you can reroll one hit roll for one of the, I mean, yeah, as you said, it's a bit messy, but I don't know, for that, especially for that high impactful, 6 damage, D3 damage, Ren 3, whatever it might be. I don't know. I like that having that up my sleeve.
If it's every unit, I think you're right. It's very good. Like especially in a boat build, it's very, very good. If it's every unit gets one reroll every shooting phase. If it's just only one reroll for the entire shooting phase, I think you get a lot more value of the 2d6 run, especially for combat landing, because it lets you at least put units on an objective that your opponent might think was out of reach because of like the speed of the boat, basically. So,
yeah, I would agree with that. And then footnotes. You got 3 footnotes. Is it the same theme? Old, new, something different?
Yeah, it's basically old, new, something different. So let's talk about new. I'll give you a guess. What do you think is the new footnote? Like, what do you think it fits the new KO playstyle?
Oh God! Don't put me on the spot here. I'm trying to manage the chat here.
Fair enough. All right. Well, then I'll talk through it.
I mean, let's say that 3d6 because like. Yeah. Because like I was just looking at because obviously Blades of Khorne preview was last night. They Scarbrand can now do 3d6. Mega Gargants could do 3d6. This is one of the things that either 3d6 charge or shut down Inspiring Presence seems to be the current theme, or 4-up rally.
Right. 3d6 charge is once again into that, like we talked about, like article plus suited move, amendment, 2d6 run, and then 3d6 charge once per game on a boat. Or really any unit, but like mostly a boat. It's like that's a massive kind of like I said, like you're playing like Fury Road style KO here, and then something old is basically without ships. You get to put a boat, you get to give a boat effectively disengage and fly high, so you can kind of feel like you're playing old KO, which is the old fly high mechanic. It just requires effective 2 CP to do it. And then something different, there's no trading with some other people. And that just lets you have the ability of a Skyfarer unit being able to shoot a unit back. Once again, Skyfarer units are not boats. So it's really into this kind of Arcanaut company build. Like if somebody shoots an Arcanaut company, you're like, cool, I could shoot you back, I guess, or Thunderers. Not that like... they don't have impressive range, so I'm curious when you're going to get to trigger that. But if you enter it, I guess against Helon, I guess it's really relevant. But for the most part, yeah, it's something different. It's not something new or old, effectively.
Yeah, I must admit, like the first thing that the Timmy in me looks at, there's no reward without risk, and I just think about, as it's mentioned in the chat, like an ironclad, with a ram crashing in, or the frigate loaded up with the, disengaging after combat. Like that to me is the playstyle I would love to play in KO.
Yep, and guess what? It's a very good playstyle, coach.
And yes, you could probably Tusk Helmet as well in the current season. I'm thinking more generically outside of this season because we'll only be here for a couple of months and then who knows what's coming up. But absolutely think of those new realm rules and things like that.
Yeah, the Tusk is going to compete against a lot of artifacts, though. There's some very good artifacts in that book.
Which we'll get to eventually, like how you look at, like, is it still the 1 drop or the drop low drops, or do we go Warlord, get the extra enhancements from the various things? But overall, I think Allegiance abilities look quite good so far. Yeah, there's been some changes, but overall, Flamingo Pie asking, how do you feel about having 3 of each type of code, considering that it's possible to get 2 of each, right number or too few?
Yeah, let's review that question when we get to the code right, because I think he kind of addresses some of that mechanical changes. And I think I mentioned earlier, I really like Barak Urbas for the 2 article concept. But yeah, like having more of those is very good. Period. Doesn't matter. It's like having more of these mechanics is very good.
Yeah, I was going to say the code write does bring an interesting little mix to the amendments, and if you are sitting between two of them, there are some good options coming up. So command traits, you've got what, 6 command traits. What's your favorite and why?
Ooh, okay. My favorite is Stormcaller. I love Stormcaller. Yes, it is. We haven't talked about the Navigator, so we'll put that in pause. We'll talk about why this is my favorite when we go to the Navigator about that. But it's my favorite for sure.
Navigator got a glow up, and Navigator got some extra rules. So I felt the same actually when I did the preview. I'm like, look, I call out Stormcaller. It's my favorite. You're not going to understand why if you open up your app right now. But outside of Stormcaller, I think something like, I don't mind X Grunstock if you are someone thinking about using Gunstock gun haulers. A nice old Sky Dog getting an extra engine work for a boat heavy build kind of stood out to me.
Cutting Feedmaster is very good as well, but it's hard to use, and it works in very specific builds, but it is a very good command trait as well.
Yeah, I really wish Grudge Bearer was better than it was. Like, it on the surface, it sounds good until you realize it's the damage inflicted by the general's weapons. I'm like, oh.
I mean, I'll be honest, like that's what I was using for my previous book. It's the exact same verbiage, and having a damage 6 admiral against like Kairos or like Scarbrand is pretty hilarious. It's like terrifying those things. So it's not that bad. It's really not that bad. It's like the other command traits are just so much better.
The challenge, as Abel has said as well, is that the range of some of your shots have gone down. So, you know, right. you can't always project your power from 30 inches now. You're going to be 18, and depending on how the battle goes, it might be hard to get to those heroes. But especially those castle ones that you want to shoot off, like Techless.
Right. Yeah.
What about artifacts? Where are you at with your artifacts? Is it Spell in the Bottle still? Is that still, because the two ones that were most popular was Spell in the Bottle and the Bomblets. Phosphorus Bomblets were the two ones that were most popular in the old book.
Yeah, I don't think Spell in the Bottle, it's still good. It's just like there's a couple. Now you lost a faction restriction, so you can't play like Warp Lightning Vortex. Also, that's a big like downgrade for that, for an example. Plus, it requires you taking an AETHER-KHEMIST, which is, we can talk about it more. Like I have a very strong opinion about the AETHER-KHEMIST, but for me, the phosphate bomblets are still very good. I mean, the problem though is you have Celestial Burst Grades as an option, and God knows this is the one thing that KO doesn't want to deal with is a 5-up ward. So like it's hard to like be like, okay, cool. So my thought process is very simple. I'm going to have a Navigator, and I'm going to have an Admiral. That's basically the starting point of every build of KO. Celestial Burst Grenade is amazing, period. It's like you can take on any hero, but it's you when you don't need it, your army plays great. When you do need it, you're like, yeah, I wish I brought that. So it's always good to take. And then the Voidstone Orb is this same exact logic. It's just having that auto unbind for just a situation. Like if you say you play against Techless, they're like, hey, I got a 5-up ward for my entire army. How about no? They're both very situation, very powerful artifacts effectively. So those are my two favorite.
You can't underestimate. So just before this last season, I was playing Stormcast, and I always brought in the Knight Incantor. The only reason I took it was that once per game, no to your spell. Being able to stop like Thanquil, who has +5 using the surfboard, Lolchen, the Soulseeker, being able to bridge him forward, being able to shut down that critical spell, whatever faction it is, the Voidstorm is worth its weight in gold.
Yep.
Would you? No, keep going.
Go for it. I said just unfortunate.
You go.
It's unfortunate the Admiral, the Celestial Burst Grenade was like a thing that he used to have on his war scroll, and they moved off of his war scroll and turned it into an artifact. But that's okay. Like it's not a huge like loss. It just kind of sucks that he was some of his like tech mechanic, but into an artifact. So at least we didn't lose it entirely. Just made it an actual resource cost investment.
I will say though, like it's a once per game artifact that can fail, which I kind of don't like. That's probably the only negative thing that I have is that if I got a once per battle thing, it should be guaranteed. Like a 2-up, like this, that's a feel bad. I got one artifact, I roll a 1.
I think your opponents would disagree.
I would disagree. I would disagree, but it feels bad. All I was going to ask you about was, would you consider the Master Wrought Armor the 5-up ward?
And I think if we talk more about like types of builds KO can bring, maybe. The problem is it depends on like if you're going to be playing a high drop or a low drop army. So it's not a bad one. It just doesn't feel like it does anything for your army, right? It does something for the admiral versus all the other artifacts do something for your army. So it's the most selfish one in the book, basically, the way I would word it.
Yeah, my initial instincts is that it's nice to have. If I had like 3 or 4 artifacts to choose from, like if I was like, it'd be my choice 3, choice 4. If I was playing narratively, yeah, cool, pick it. But if I've got 1 or 2 options, it's probably not my first 2. I'd rather probably Arcane Tome or something else than just a 5-up ward on a hero. The Admiral's not a linchpin to your army.
Nope.
It's helpful, but it's not. Your army doesn't crumble if your admiral dies.
And the nice thing too, if you still want a 5-up ward on something that isn't the admiral, you still have the GHB artifact that does the same thing. So
cool. What about the Endrin works? We'll start at the Ironclad.
You know what? You always make me go first. It's time for you to go first. Which one is your favorite arc and arc? Because I can guarantee you it's the same one for me.
Listen, people have already heard my favorites. Like I did it in the preview. So look, what stood out for me? So if I've got an Ironclad, I don't mind the old reliable hull plates being able to negate the first wound in every phase. You see like Manfred, and that's really attractive. Although it's got a lot of wounds, so it's like, do you really need that? Look, for me, what do I like? All right, Line of the Sand, I'll say the Omniscope, getting the extra move.
Okay. I thought we were on the same page on that one. The deal breaker ram for me. It's what I used to run always, and it's still very good.
Oh, the ram. Goddamn. No, I missed that. I just skipped that because there's too many words. I'm trying
But I mean, like, if you have, it's really funny to be like, once per game, you're like, this ram is going to have a 3d6 charge. Enjoy. It's quite fun. I mean, you probably played Kragnos before, like Stonehorns. You know how fun that is when you roll that? You're like, yeah. Except it's on a battleship. So
I'm playing with the same mechanics at the moment with Sigvold and the War Shrine. 3d6 charge on Sigvold. Sigvold gets extra attacks based on the 3d6 charge. Yeah, those four mortal wounds. So an average on a 3d6 charge, an average dice roll is a 10. So if you do the stats, you should be doing 5 mortal wounds on average. So that's not bad. That could clear the screen. That could, degrade a monster profile before it gets into combat. That's nothing to sneeze about.
It also lets you just clear up this, just purifies your opponents. Like there's certain armies where you're like, hey, that boat, it's got a 3d6 charge with a 4-up mortal wounds. And they tell me, some players are like, cool, I am not gonna go as gun-ho as I wanted to go in your face. So
it is hard with the big base size to leap over screens. So you want to be like tagging. What I find really beneficial is you tag a unit and then, or you kind of get as close to that so you can maneuver as best as possible. But yeah, the mortal wounds are great. Cool. Yep. I actually missed it because I'm looking at all the words. I'm like, oh, I haven't got time to read. We're here for 10 years. What about the frigates?
Okay, so frigates are a little simpler. Magnificent Omniscope. We talked about like the Fury Road, theme here. Got to go for more speed. Got to go for all the speed possible in the frigate. So one frigate will have like a 6-inch move ideally for me. That's like, it's all the others are not bad. They're just like there's that extra 2-inch range can mean the difference between dropping bombs on a target or just being able to reach something for your guys inside shoot. So like, yeah, magnificent omniscope for sure.
The Sky Mine stood out to me as a second choice. Like when I looked at this, I'm like the fail safe. I don't really want to put my Endrin work based on something dying, especially I don't like that. I mean, the shoots again, like it's okay, but a dice roll for 1 in every 6, well, one in every D6 might die. So what, average 1 to 2 if I've got up 10 to 11 guys in there. So like Omniscope and then Sky Mines were my two choices.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're actually clearly, for me, it's like if I have a frigate full of Thunders, Malefic Sky Mine. If I have a Thunders full of Endrin Riggers or Sky Wardens, then it's a magnificent Omniscope. It's like that's the trade-off.
The other reason why Omniscope is first and Sky Mines are second is it's a risk. Like if I have my Sky Mines as my first choice and there's no flying units, then I've just wasted my whole Endrin work.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's great, like let's say I get within 6 of Kairos or Teclis or some type of flying monster. Sweet, I can do up to D6 mortal wounds on it. That's pretty nice.
Surprise!
But you got, but that's why I'm like, but you got to get within 6. Good luck. You probably it's a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
Let's go Archaon. I don't know. Let's go Archaon. D6 mortals first, and then shoot him.
It's the things are going to be chasing the Thunderers frigate probably have fly, so it's always nice to have. And the things that you're going to be ramming down your opponent's throat probably are not going to be fighting it with flight unit. So especially now that we have Khorne and Hedonites, and Khorne is mostly all Bloodthirster with fly, and then Hedonites have like nothing with fly except for the name characters, and that's it, right? Like that's all they got.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of flying in Hedonites.
Yeah,
but I'm seeing a lot of talk like Mighty Skull Crushers with their 2+ save is getting a lot of noise online. So that's not going to help you if people go towards the mortal side. But this is not the Khorne show. What about the gun haul? What about gun haul? Do you still like gun haulers? It feels like I haven't seen a lot of gun haulers lately. Will they make a resurgence? And if you took them, what would be the Endrin work?
So if I did take him, it's probably because I'm running the command trait to make them battle line, so that way I don't have to invest in a third battle line unit, or I'm playing Barak Urbas. And if I did take him, I would definitely, and I had the ability to take an Endrin work on, I would take the. Come on, you know the answer. It's D6 mortal wounds when I charge. Something. I mean, it's basically another ram. Think about it that way.
You wouldn't make it a transport vessel?
No,
because that would be tempting, right? Like that would be a tempting option.
It's the only time I would see that happen is because like the reason why people used to do the collapsible compartments was because they were taking the spell in the bottle and they were using Sylphin to do the pregame, the hero phase move, and then that way the unit they were throwing in your opponent's face was like very fast, and it was also like kind of like a low investment risk, and that's why they were doing it. So less like it's much less likely you'll see it more used as well. Unless somehow your opponent decides to have sharpshooter Thunderers and they just decided to have a way to basically put something in this really weird spots, that way they can get range to your JCs. But more consistently than not, you'll probably see the Depth Slittler's Torpedo, because there's one thing KO always needs more of, and that's mortal wound output. So you got to find as many ways to get more mortal into the army as possible.
I was literally about to say that would do. What I was going to say is that when you're up against Nighthaunt, you're either playing volume or you need to find mortal wounds, and you just don't have enough natural mortal wounds in your army. So going too heavy on the rend, going too heavy on, very specific high damage, you could have a bad time in certain matchups. It's
not even just Nighthaunt, just like Slaves of Darkness is also like another army that like usually kind of doesn't care about your win that much. And then, Stormcast Eternals as well, having mortal wounds. And it's, by the way, it's another sequentially damage that gets to be done outside of the shooting phase, which is always nice to KO. And that's what you're trying to maximize on is damage every phase as much as possible. is my hot take for him.
Yeah. No longer is it, like, as we've said at the top of the show, no longer is it about flying high, loading up with the highest volume of rend, which is why you didn't choose Spell in the Bottle Purple Sun for that reason, right? It's no longer drop sun, pew, 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 and make the most of it. It's the playstyle has changed a lot.
Yeah.
Now, where are you at? Like, are all 6 of these sky ports equal in their own right? Some stand out more than others. I just want to say I love Barrack Thring, but it kills me that I can't put my ally Duarden in a ship. If I could put, if this, that's the one rule I needed to happen. If it said, you get the Skyfarer keyword, and I could put that Rune Lord, I could put that Fireslayer Priest, that one idiot on a boat, I'd be really happy.
Right.
But right now, like, I look at it and go, right, you do a prayer once, and then for the rest of the game, these little heroes running up the board, just trying to keep up.
So there's and there's an extra thing that I will say I'm kind of frustrated with that sub-allegiance, because I wish it said allied and non-allied Dwarven priest. But I'm still hope at some point or another we'll get like priest, like in some manner, like through an artifact in a GHB, or maybe expanded line. Like say like Grumdy ever comes out as a ward scroll that's like a coalition knit, like, you know, or something like where we could still have a priest in the army. Like I would, because now by making an allied Dwarven, it's only ever going to be allies. And once again, allies don't benefit from allegiance mechanics, so a whole other situation. I would love to be able to put a Skyfarer like hero with like some kind of the priest version of an arcane tome, and then like Barrack Thring would be like just absolutely amazing at that point in terms of subfaction for sure.
Where do you stand on all 6 of these? So I went into my little rant around Thring because it sounds really cool. I thought about it. I'm like, this is a really cool prayer, and I actually quite like it because it would work quite well in KO, other than the logistical, how does that priest keep up?
Right.
I mean, 16 is still okay, but with the speed in KO, you'll outrun that range pretty quickly, or you're holding your force back just to be able to tap into that prayer.
And it's funny because they didn't give it to Engine Riggers or Skywarden, which is actually the unit you would really want it on, because they have the highest volume of shooting to fetch 4 mortal wounds, which is, it's fine. It's Thunderers. Like they're still pretty good. Archons are still pretty good. For sure. But yeah, you're right. It's too slow to keep up. For me specifically, like you asked me earlier, which one I think would rate, like if they're all equal. So I think the one data point that misses on this slide, the reason why they're all equal, is what they unlocked for Battleline and also what they unlocked for heroes. So Barrack Nar is a very good sub action, not the face value of the sub allegiance mechanic, because I will say, we'll talk about it more, but like KO really doesn't need that much CP generation anymore. Like it feels like it does, but there's plenty of ways of getting free CP generation through the War Scrolls. So like it's cool to have, but it's not like a super necessity. But Barrack Nar gets Battleline Thunderers, which is super awesome, and then they get Brock, which is a super good hero in the book now. So when we get to his War Scroll, we'll talk more about him. But that's why it's highly rated. It's because of the other 2 things. Barrack Urbaz gets gun haulers as battle lines, which, you know, we talked about, like that's a really nice thing. And to be honest, they probably have the strongest sub-faction mechanic. Having 2 articles is super nice, like plus 2-inch movement to your boats, and then pick a unit, be +1 in wound for the rest of the game, except for everything in your army is pretty nice. Barrack Zilfin, all your frigates become battle line. So when we're talking about like low drop army construction, Barrack Zilfin is still the king because you make all your frigates battle line, which means they don't take behemoth slots. So that's a huge value. And then also great end-in work. So you can have your ram on the Ironclad and then your magnificent Omniscope on a frigate. So super awesome. We talked about Barrack Thring. Barrack Zon is probably one of my personal favorite in terms of faction mechanic. Because I love the fact that it makes my sky. It's no longer just the Sky Wardens. It's like every Skyfarer. That's your heroes. That's your Arcanaut company. That's like everything that's not a boat gets +1 to hit and wound when they charge, and that's really powerful. But sadly, they don't really have any kind of like I think it makes Sky Warden battle line in the subfaction, but it's just like that's in comparison to the other factions, I think they're a little bit lackluster in that department. And then Barak Monar, which gets, I think, probably you'll see a lot of play in GTs, is because it stops command abilities, which is a really powerful mechanic, period. If you just play this very aggressive play style, which is what Barak Mornar is, it's basically the elite pirates, like truly the pirates of Kharadron Overlords. And then they have access to, Drekki, which is a really good hero, and we'll talk about his war scroll. And then the other named character from the Underworld, Dogman, which also is a really cool kind of mechanic. So in terms of like unlocking things, the way I would rank them for me is it starts with Barak Zilfin, Barak Nar, Barak Zon, Barak Urbaz, or Barak Zon for fluff reason, not because Barak Urbaz is necessarily worse, and then Barak Mornar, Barak Thring, until they fix the priest thing. I would love to see them to fix the priest thing, or at least clarify it.
Yeah, because technically as well, the new mercenaries are actually are they allies or are they mercenaries? So
mercenaries are allies now. They're just the problem is that it's the way they're wording it. It's like they want you to break the rules, but they didn't actually say, yes, we want you to break the rules. So.
I'll be honest, I've spent no time looking at the Regiments of Renown. I've given it zero look. But I think one thing I will say is having the privilege of looking at every book so far, like getting access to preview, I find most books have a couple of good options and then a couple of ones that aren't very good. They're very narrative.
Right.
When I look at this, like majority, if not all of them, have some type of play. Even Barak Thring, right? You could. This to me is like a once per game benefit, and if you get any more access, even better. It's like, cool, buff up those Archanaut company or the Thunderers, send them forward, shoot with your little special ability, and then if you happen to get in range again, turn 3 or whatever it might be, or maybe you've got a unit that holds back. Awesome. But when I look at it, Nar, Zilfin, Zon, Urbaz, they've all even more Nar is a bit more techie. They've all got play.
Yep, I agree. I kind of wish for Barak Thing they made it an addition to regular damage instead of like the attack sequence stops, because it punishes you for not punishes you, but it's with the way Gits came out and some of the other triggering of mortal wounds from the newer books came out. It felt like, if you're going to give Gits this version, why are you giving everybody else the worst version of this? And it's really not that oppressive when you think about like what Thunders are doing in an output for mortal wounds. So it's just like I was very shocked by like how they made it so it's the attack sequence stops after the rolling the 6, but it is what it is.
Flamingo Pie asking an interesting question around Drekki. I mean, do we have a long history with Black Library models? Not yet. But we have it in the Battletome, right? So Drekki is in the book. So I would like to think that this model will be supported for a long period of time. But obviously I can't predict how GW is going to play, but go buy it, go support it, and then more likely to keep it on the range. I can't see them legending it in a year or two, but Gottrek's been around for ages, and it'll probably lead me to a question of how you feel about Gotttrek, but I don't see Drekki disappearing from the range anytime soon, considering he's in the book.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think it also because they didn't add any new name characters in this edition, in this release. Like they were kind of all in on like making sure the Underworld stuff it gets used as kind of like the new name characters for each of those, like or Black Library releases as like the new name characters for each book now.
Speaking of, I kind of threw a little bit of bait in the water about Gotttrek. Where are you at with him? Would you bring this Duarden? Because he wouldn't get the priest. He certainly is not a priest, but he is a Duarden. Is there a play for that combat-focused, middle of the board, smash people in the face with our favorite Fire Slayer, not Fire Slayer?
You mean Grimnir? I was going to say, the way I would describe Gotttrek is, we talked earlier about amendments, footnotes, and articles about how there's something new, something old, something different. He plays really well into the something different like archetype. So if you wanted to basically bring a Barak Mornar list, which is I think what really super maximizes the something different build, or even Barak Train to an extent, the problem is you can't take Alec Priest into with Gotttrek, which sucks. The question is, like, what does Gotrek give you? Well, if you're going to play a mostly foot KO, Gotrek gives you that board presence pressure up front. So he's still super relevant in that type of archetype. But if you're going to bring a boat list, he feels weird in a boat list, mostly because the boat list wants to. He gets left behind is what it comes down to. So you're kind of already kind of jamming into your opponent, as I said, Fury roading your opponent of KO boats. And then Gotrek is just a bystander. He's what's the actor's name who played the main character in Fury Road? He's doing something totally separate.
he's the dude at the back with the guitar and the big speakers blaring out.
He might as well not be on the table, because most of the time your opponents are going to either try to ignore him or you're in your opponent's boats. So it's like he's kind of like, if you play foot KO, thumbs up. If you play boat KO, thumbs down.
What if, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, what if you had Gotrek in the middle of the board and on your flanks you had your two boats, or you had your boat concentration?
Sure.
So you're trying to force your opponent in the center of the board, because one of the strategies against Gotrek is avoiding that 18-inch bubble and try to avoid him like the plague. Well, I can't say that anymore. Look how COVID went for us. But if you're in the middle of if you're like concentrating people with like really strong firepower from the sides and forcing them in the middle, does that change your thoughts on Gotrek, or is that just more theory hammer and not enough practicality?
Well, it depends what kind of, like, if you're doing the double ironclad build, then maybe I could see Gotrek being like a relevant thing, because you're not planning on charging necessarily. But if you're playing the frigate build, you're definitely planning on charging. So like, you're not actually playing on the flanks when the frigate builds. You're playing more of like into your opponent's like flanks. And that's a very different, like, aggressional play style. And even if you decide to delay that move by one turn to get more Gotrek into position, it doesn't really buy you anything, because your opponent's still going to try to ignore Gotrek anyway. So the equational math is still similar. It's one turn later. So most of the time, you're going to be, if you play frigates, you're going to be trying to charge. The way to milk the most damage out of frigates is move over your opponent's units and charge them. Like, that's how you milk damage with frigates. It's not to stand still and just shoot them from the flank, basically.
First off, you just reminded me, KO players, I'd like to welcome you to the ABC Club. It's one that I, in my nearest and dearest hearts as a destruction player, always be charging. ABC, always be charging with that frigate. I probably had the ironclad in my head when I thought about that, because yeah, you're right. The frigates and your gun haulers. I mean, gun haulers aren't that powerful on the sides, but it's the ironclad. One extra thought. I just had this thought. I don't know if it actually would work. You mentioned earlier about Gotrek with a heavy, let's say, Thunderers or
Arcanauts company.
Arcanaut companies. I was trying to say Arcanaut admirals. I'm like, no, that's not the word. Don't say it. Don't say it. Don't say it. But let's say I've got that unit of 30 Arcanaut company, right? Yeah. And I've got Gotrek on the table. Then I've got that ability to do 4-up rally. Mm-hmm. Can you see a possible list brewing there? Maybe some legs?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think it has legs. If you're going to do the foot build KO, Gotrek is, you want to take him. He does the job the frigates are going to do, or the ironclads are going to do, without having you investing in those boats, which is, it's going to deter your opponent from forcing down an alleyway, basically. You're closing a gap of combat for him. And then that's what the boats do, especially the ironclad does today, right? So, Gotrek in a foot build KO is very nice, for sure.
It's there as an option if you like it. It may not be your playstyle. You do you. Which then leads us to your grand strategies and your battle tactics. You did have one grand strategy which is gone because you don't have Urgold anymore. Not Urgold.
Thank God.
Wrong stunty there. When I looked at the Blades of Khorne grand strategies last night, I got to admit none of them really stand out to me. Is this the same opinion with KO, or do you think we've got some good options here?
We have good options, but two are clearly superior from all the other options, and one is vastly superior even than the second one. before, I'll tell you what. I'll talk about the second one, and I'll let you guess what the first one is. The vastly superior one.
I have to read now. Go for it. You go for
it. So the second one, which I think is like, it's still really good, but not quite as good as the best one, is Protector Fleet. After your deployment, your opponent must pick one terrain feature to hold a bounty of minerals or wealth. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if you control that terrain feature. It's actually really nice because of how terrain feature control works and the way the army plays, to just be able to snag something in the late game with, fly high, especially since frigates are 5 models and so forth. It's, in terms of like, it's not hard to play, but you actually have to really think about how you're going to score it. Versus the number 1 grand strat, which I'll let Coach basically decipher. I hope I've given you enough time to read.
See, so first off, Prospector Fleet is my style of game. That's me. I'm a Timmy type player. I love those types of things. So Prospector Fleet would be my favorite. But if I was going to choose one for a tournament, I think Defender Flagship would be my favorite. Assuming I'm going in with a durability build.
Sure.
I think it's achievable.
It's very achievable.
Guided. I don't like Guided by the Code. I don't like any grand strategy that relies on 4 battle tactics.
Yeah.
In the heat of the moment, I shouldn't have to choose scoring a General's Handbook battle tactic or failing my grand strategy. Like, that to me is just feel bad.
Yeah. So my number 1 is Rule Disguise. It's just mechanically speaking, it doesn't change your game plan at all. So Prospector Fleet, the way you have to play it is you actually have to plan for it. Rule Disguise, you don't have to plan for it. You can just literally show up to the table. It's like, do you have any fly behemoth? Cool. I guess I just don't have. I can still play the super defensive build, right? Because your boat still has to survive, just like defend the flagship. But you don't have to worry about it. But if your opponent brings a fly behemoth, let me guarantee you that whatever fly behemoth hits the table is definitely something you're trying to kill turn 1 or turn 2. So it doesn't even matter that it's part of their grand strat. Because let's talk about fly behemoths. It's Bloodthirsters, it's Kairos, it's Nagash, it's Arcan, like things like that, where you're like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that. I want to get that thing off the table as quickly as possible. So the only other army that can bring like a massive amount of fly behemoth, I think, is basically Git. So they bring all Mangler Squigs, or like a lot of Mangler Squig, which is 4 or whatever, how many they can bring.
No, we're not doing that. If you listen to any of my videos, I'm like, I think when I thought about Rule Disguise, the first thing I thought about, and it's the same thing I did with the KO, the Khorne book, was what happens if my only behemoth a model on my opponent's side is Archaon.
Yeah.
And yes, on one hand, I want to kill him, but sometimes it's better to kill everyone else, deal with the Varangard, deal with the warriors, and outscore him, and not have to focus. And I think for me, that's why I didn't choose Rule Disguise.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, like, it's one of those situations where it's a little harder to do if there's an Archaon on the table. But at the same time, you can basically, with a Navigator, make it so that you don't have to worry about Archaon until like turn 3 or 4, and then just hopefully pick up the rest of your opponent's army or outscore them in so much where the grand strategy doesn't matter. But the turn you have to commit to Archaon, and let's assume you make the 2-up save in the Celestial Burst Grenade, you can very easily say, I pick him up. Like, it's very hard for Archaon to survive a full KO, especially in the current iteration of his book, a full KO like commitment. It's incredibly challenging for him to do that. It didn't used to be that way, but yeah, it is very hard now.
No, especially though that they are going very low drop. They can use like demonic speed. They could be in your face turn 1, so they could be very aggressive, which again is why I didn't choose this. But I take your point. I can see it. Me personally, Prospector Fleet, even Defend the Flagship, probably Defend the Flagship is a bit more in my control, but I think all 3 of them have play. I think we both agree guided by the code, don't do.
Yeah, kind of. Any one of those. I'm surprised they keep printing those grand strats because, like, to be honest, this is one of the few books where you can actually achieve that consistently. But it's also kind of, as you described, like, why would you tie your grand strat to you achieving battle tactics? That's this easily a 5-point swing just for failing a battle tactic. That's really bad versus a 2-point swing. So that's 100%.
It makes me think that maybe General's Handbook 2024, maybe even 2025, may not have grand strategies in the General's Handbook.
Right.
Like they keep putting it in there, and it makes me feel like there's a point in time where they'll just remove the Band-Aid and it'll only be book tactics and grand strats.
Yeah. I actually, this is to take a cue from 40K. What I'm hoping they do in the next year, GHB, is they do what they did for Chapter Proof, which is take all the battle tactics, all the grand strat, every Battletome, include them in the GHB, and then rewrite them to balance them out across each other, instead of having GHB battle tactics and grand strats, basically. But
like
we'll see what they do.
Like Fire Slayers and Disciples of Tzeentch, like if you have an army, you win.
I mean, to be honest, like we're going to talk about these battle tactics, but they're on the same kind of level here.
Let's get into the battle tactics. There's some really good battle tactics. The only thing I thought about, and I'll pass the mic to you in a second, is there's a couple of ones that timing issues I thought were a bit off. I thought it was a bit weird.
Right.
Because it's like, where is it? There's one about disembarking and embarking, but you can't do it in anyway. Pass it over to you. Where are you at with your battle tactics? Do you like them? Do you like them all? Ones that you find you're using more than others?
Yeah. So there is in this book there is 5 battle tactics which are easily done, and one that is kind of challenging. And challenging and not like it's hard to you to achieve it. It's very dice dependent. So we'll talk about like the easiest one in the book, Stake a Claim. So Stake a Claim, the reason why it's the easiest, and I'll read it out, is you can pick this tactic only if you control fewer opponents, which is in your opponent. You complete this tactic to control more objectives than your opponent at the end of the turn. Let's say you're a low drop build or a high drop build. Just don't set up on an objective. Like, sure, like if you don't set up an objective, your opponent goes first, they're like, cool, they score 1-2 more, which they were already going to do anyway. Like, it doesn't matter what your game plan is. But if they make you go first and you didn't set up an objective and they did set up an objective, you're like, cool, I can do Stake a Claim, because it doesn't say not doing it on the first turn. So you just auto guarantee Stake a Claim. Very easy. It's like cunning maneuver easy, basically. And then we got the second easiest one, which is Opening Salvo. Opening Salvo it's like one battle tactics. I don't even know why they bothered writing that one, because it was very much like, hey, what does Hale want to do? Oh, yeah, kill something in shooting before there's anything else. Cool, let's write a battle tactic where it just lets you do that. Now, there is a restriction to it. Like, you can't. It's going to get a lot harder to use in the late half of the game because it has to be literally the first unit that has to be killed. But it is kind of like, if you're playing high drops and your opponent makes you go first because they don't want to take a KO double turn, it's just like, okay, I guess I'll just do Opening Salvo turn 1. And it's very easy to do with very little risk involved into it. Can I pause you on
Opening Salvo? I just want to quickly ask you, do you see a faction or a position where you may be denied Opening Salvo? So, for example, like one of the things that comes to mind is like Iron Jaws, for example. You know, anything that's got speed that can get into your face. Obviously, you've got the mirrors. Like, what are the types of armies that might deny you Opening Salvo?
Okay, yeah, it's actually Giants. Giants are one of the factions that can deny you Opening Salvo, just because it's hard to mathematically kill a Giant in one turn in shooting, even if the amount of shooting KO brings, and it has to be killed in the shooting phase.
You're talking obviously mega gargants, not baby gargants. If there's baby gargants, you'll kill them easily.
Yeah. It's talking about the 4 mega gargants build. It's that additional kind of variable into like, can I do the number of wounds required to bring them down? And that makes it hard to do. In terms of Iron Jaws, usually the Iron Jaws list you see are Pigs and a Maw Crusher. And Pigs are 15 wounds. You can easily pick up a 15 wound model of Pigs. They're not that hard to kill. Like, it's just a 3-man unit. The other unit that can be kind of challenging to do with Opening Salvo, it's the what's their name? the Beast of Chaos list, like it's like it has to be it's like a very niche list, and it's very unlikely you'll see it. And I think finally, it's just going to be like probably Khorne. And the new iteration of Khorne can be somewhat hard if they went for like the Bloodthirster kind of. I don't know. It's opening. I played SIG games. Opening salvo, I've only failed once, and it was because I failed my removing a ward artifact. The guy lived, I think, like 3 wounds on a unit basically because he had a 6-up ward. So there's still that element of just luck to it. I mean, it's a very luck-based battle tactic, but the reason why I say it's so powerful is because it's your game plan anyway. You're going to be trying to do this anyway. So like, like there's no counterplay for your opponent in this battle tactic. It's not even about sitting in an objective or anything. It's just literally, oh, do I want to shoot something off the table turn 1? Yeah, it sounds pretty good. That's pretty much what I want to do anyway. So, and yes, you're right. There are some factions that can be problematic, but they're very few and far in this current environment.
I will just say before we move on is especially if you're new to KO, I think understanding probability and likelihood of destroying a unit, especially like looking at the rend, assuming your opponent does all out defense, assuming certain things, what's the likelihood? Because I can see people overestimating the damage that they do and failing it because one person survived on 1 wound.
Yep. Yeah, no, I will say KO is like this weird, like, you have to be really good about snap calling outputs. You can't just basically assume that like your experience in the past, like every battle tactic decision you're going to make is like, what if I roll the worst possible case in existence? What battle tactic can I do? Okay, is operating salvo still reasonable? Then it's probably the one you want to take at that point. So
yeah. Stake a claim, opening salvo, 2 really good opening ones. What else do you like there?
Blast of Smitherin is also very good in the mid game to that point because it's just once again it's placing to the mechanic of how the army wants to play. And that one at least doesn't require the shooting phase. It can also involve the combat phase and the charge phase, where a lot of KO damage is going to come from nowadays, and not just like that. Yeah, so it's a fairly easy one. Like, it's like basically gaining momentum with a lot less restrictions. This is the way I look at it in terms of like scoreability.
I always felt mobilize the fleet and boots on the ground are situational, given that I need to have 3 friendly units to embark and disembark. Obviously, depending on battle plans and how much is enemy territory versus neutral territory, how achievable is that going to be? They're not bad. It's just I think they're not my first couple.
Right. So boots on the ground is very easy to do with frigates now. It used to be actually kind of annoying to do in the previous iteration of the book because it was like a resource commitment. You didn't know if it was going to pay off. In terms of frigates now, it's actually boots on the ground is very easy to do on turn 2 and onward because the way the disembark mechanic works on the charge and so forth. So it's fairly like. And then, like, the only thing that matters is, like, can you have 3 units survive out of your frigate, basically?
And units aren't, and this goes back to something you said right at the top of the show, was that you like to put a small hero in every boat because 1, they're not elite, but 2, that obviously then gives you the 3 options to embark and disembark, where you might naturally think Thunderers or Arcanaut Company. No, we could be thinking about heroes as well. So not such a bad play.
Yeah, and especially now that you can put engine rigs and sky wardens, which can only be a maximum unit size of 9 in a frigate, that leaves you 3 slots for 3 heroes. So technically, you could have 4 units instead of boots on the ground, like very easily, basically. So in terms of like achievability, it's a very easy battle tactic, and if you basically hold on to things inside the boat after turn 1, so mobilize the fleet, though you pointed out, is I honestly haven't been able to score that one even in the previous book at all very easily. It's just never like I don't like having to deploy units just so I can score mobilize the fleet later. It feels weird. It doesn't mesh well with the play style of the army.
Yeah, this mobilize the fleet to me seems like a late game battle tactic. Like turn 3, I've done my damage. I've got a couple of things that could re-embark. Turn 4, I might choose mobilize the fleet, or turn 5, but it's not something in the early game I would be looking to use.
Yeah.
Bombing run being the last. Oh, sorry, go for it.
No, keep going. I was just going to say bombing the last seems, again, situational, that if I have a unit that I've got attrition, but there's a couple of models left, and I'm feeling confident that 2 or 3 mortal wounds could kill it, sure. But it's again, like, you want to de-risk this as much as possible.
Yeah, that's one that's like super dicey to me, mechanically speaking, because you can only achieve it with sky vessels first. So we'll put it out of the way. So most lists are going to have frigates or ironclads. Frigates are probably your consistent ways doing bombing runs because of speed. And the problem is redeploy. So let's say you were able to hit a unit that's like less, like 4 wounds left in the unit with the first frigate, and you don't kill it, and then they redeploy away. Your other frigate might not now be out of range to be able to drop bombs, and that's why it's like super dicey to use bombing run. You have to be really your frigates have to be basically point blank, and the unit has to be like 3 to 4 wounds left to consistently like be able to score that one.
And again, do you want to be committing your boats to just bombing running this thing? Like,
right.
Is it the right decision during the game?
Yep. Yeah. And this is like, obviously we're talking about these annoying GHB battle tactics. You know, like I said, I mentioned earlier, you still have cunning maneuver, which is very easy. Gaining momentum, which is very easy for KO. You still have United Defense, because KO is a lot of Galatian champions. I don't know. And mechanically speaking, if you just do the easiest 3 battle tactics in this book, you're going to be solid. So,
probably the other call out before I move over to the battalions is don't forget that bombing racks has no effect on units that can fly.
Yeah.
So if you see a little hero that's got, like, let's say it's a little vampire lord on foot who can fly, it's got a couple of wounds left, you're like, yes, I'm going to pick that.
Yeah.
And then you forget that you can't kill it because it doesn't affect. So just keep that in mind. It's because there are some sort of small heroes that can fly that will catch you off.
Yep.
What about the battalions? Are these worthy of dropping Battle Reg, Commanding Entourage, Battle Reg, Warlord, all of those? Like, are these things that you would strive for?
I think Attack Squadron is still very good. Having Expert and Swift, it's just I can't, like, in my previous iterations of KO, I used to use a lot more Argonaut companies, so having actually struggle finding a space for them in their book. Not so because they're bad, they're just like I'm having a hard time finding a slot for them. And then Expert Wing is still very good. It's just that, once again, it's that weird limitation. Like, I can't seem to build it. I haven't found myself building a list where I have 2 gun haulers, and it's like none of those battalions are bad. They're just, mechanically speaking, I'm having a hard time building lists that really uses them effectively.
Yeah, they're okay, but I mean, for me, if I could get into, again, Battle Reg, Warlord, Commanding Entourage, I feel like they're my first choice. But if you have a build, they're good benefits, but I wouldn't purposely build a list towards Escort Wing unless that was already the current structure of what I wanted to build.
Right. The reason Battle Reg is hard with KO is because the boats, unless you're Burak Zilfin, are basically they only have 1 slot in a Bat Reg. It gets really hard to. You can still squeeze a Bat Reg into the army, but it doesn't give you a huge low drop count if you do that with multi-boat situation. You're more likely probably going to run Warlord or Command Rush for the extra enhancements because you have really good ones. And then finally speaking, Galatian Sharpshooter is a mechanic. It's a battalion, and it's like the first time I think there's an army that benefits a lot from Galatian Sharpshooter has been KO, basically.
Yeah. Most armies will have 1 good shooting unit in a battalion. You actually have the tools to put all 3 having very good damage. Right. So yeah, good shout there. Before we get into your list, I do want to talk quickly about the Code Right, the new minor hero. What was your first read on it? Is this something that you're going to take? Do you like it? Because you do have a lot of minor heroes. You have a lot of sub commanders.
Yeah, to be honest, I was just, when he first came out, I was just like, I want to fit him in every list I can play with. And then as I started playing games, I've been finding ways to cut him. And that's not saying these rules are bad. It's just that So I think most people, when first looked at them face value, were like, the extra CP is like massive because it seems to be a very CP hungry army. But then you find that like there's like, you know, flagship mechanics. There is like the old Grundstruck command tree. There's ways where like you don't, or Barak Nar, where you basically don't feel like you CP starve during the game. So it was just like, okay, so I guess he's niche for certain sub-factions. Fine, that's not too bad. His other mechanic is fantastic, which is the, you know, basically getting an extra footnote most of the time and then potentially having an amendment, you know, or swapping to another amendment. But as I've been playing the game, I've been finding that like I have never needed to swap. So it's been this weird situation where I'm just like, I don't know where to put him. I just don't know where I'm gonna get the max value out of this hero. And even though like his rules are fantastic, I personally speaking, I haven't found. I'll frame it this way. I think what he does the best is it helps players who are not so experienced as me have this kind of get out of jail card hero. Basically, he helps them address certain decisions they made during the game that penalize them, like losing general early or spending it on the wrong command ability, and he kind of really helps address that mechanic or those types of mistakes. That's the way I think I've come down to the code right. I've tried to make him work in my list, and every time I'm like, he's the fat I have to cut. I have never been able to find. I'm like, yeah, this guy just brings so much value to me all the time.
It's interesting because when you look at it, he's 90 points, which is not very expensive, right? You got a little hero. Nope. Being able to get extra CP is always good. Getting access to additional footnotes and amendments can be good, especially because all your footnotes are once per game. Right. But it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is while they're all nice, they're not critical to your strategy, and there are other sub-commanders who are competing in that same space that maybe, like we've said, the Navigator, for example, might be a better investment, or it could be upgrading boat A to boat B.
Right. I think for me, it's the problem I've been running into with him is I really want him to swap the amendment in case I want to go from swapping from the reroll ones to hit amendment back to the 2d6 charge amendment. But it's not consistent. It's a dice roll. And so the 50, it's a coin toss effectively. And find that like it's not like the investment of that's really where his value is. And in that investment for him for just that value, I was like, I'd rather have an extra Endrin Master or basically Navigator if I don't have one already. Like he's just like the Navigator is just so much more value for me than a code right.
I guess the challenge as well is that when you swap out a footnote or your amendment, it's happening as a heroic action.
Right.
So you're trading off finest hour, heroic leadership, heroic recovery, all of those, right? And yes, in this GBH, there's abilities to do two of them, but averagely, it's like, do I want to spend that resource? And what I'm hearing from you is it's a nice to have, not necessarily a critical unit to KO.
Right. Yeah, that's the way I would basically. He's a nice luxury. To be honest, I've had games where I'd rather have the 80 points down for having the Triumph than the code right. That's how much I value the Triumph than the code right. So
yeah, it's interesting actually, because this year it feels like people are starting to, not you, but just people in general are starting to see the value in Triumphs. First off, for years, people have even forgotten that was a mechanic in the game. But now I'm starting to see people playing for it. People going, even like Noah Singh is going down like 100 points, even 150 points to guarantee a Triumph and going double Triumph. Gits have made it very important to see being able to like avoid battle shock immunity and stuff. So yeah, Triumph, I can see value. You play into that so well with the +1/2 wound.
Yeah, and then if you're low enough, you're blocking Gits from having Indomitable. So it's another like VAP prop. So
points changed. And look, we can go into the weeds. There's a lot of minor changes here or there. Anything that you thought like really stood out to you, like, oh, the points now are too expensive, I'm going to drop it, or you know what, that Navigator going down 15 points now makes it a worthy addition to my army. Is there anything that kind of stood out to you without going to War and Peace?
You know, at first when I saw the 60-point increase of frigates, I was just like, oh my God, what have they done to my frigates? And then I read frigates and I was like, no, that's probably fair. Honestly, all the points are, I like the only unit I will say probably was still overcosted, and I know I'm going to burn in hell for this one, is the Thunderers, which I still feel are probably 10 points to 50 points too expensive. But other than that, like everything else, I would even argue that frigates probably could come up even more points than they already are, which I know a lot of KO players are probably going to hate me for saying that. But, you know, for the most part, all the points seem pretty like good in that book.
I tend to agree with Abel. Is like when I look at the gun hauler at 170, I'm like, oh, I feel like that's a bit too expensive. Like I used to pay 150 for them as a Tempest Eye coalition, and I thought that was fair. Like it floated between 130 to 150, and I thought that was good. 170 as a Tempest Eye player, I wouldn't take it.
I mean, you did gain like an extra save on it. It doesn't like, and it gives 6-up war to boats, which now have more wounds than it used to. So the 10-point addition is, you know, I can see why, but they also made its guns, like the cannons and the underslung guns, better, because the underslung gun used to be like a really bad version of the frigate or the ironclad version, but now it's just a 2-shot version of that. So it actually had a fairly good glow up in terms of output and durability. It's just that, yes, why am I paying 170 points? That's almost like, you know, I could wait 130 more points and buy a whole new frigate. But once again, I'll be like, frigates are undercosted. Yeah. So
and that to me is exactly right. Like as a Tempest Eye player, putting my little Cities of Sigmar hat on, I would use hitches to put on 6 engine riggers on a boat, which I can't do, and I'm like, I'd rather just do a frigate. I'd rather just do an ironclad. But yes, the 6-up ward to another boat is good. There are some things in it that's good, but to me, 170 feels a little bit too pricey. But he makes some good points.
Give me cheaper gun haulers. I would love to on a Barak Urbaz list of nothing but gun haulers. We can call it the dance of the cannons, because it's just going to be cannons.
I want to ask you about Brock, but I know one of your lists has Brock, so I'm going to save it, because I looked at that, like nobody takes Brock. I've never seen Brock on the table ever in the entire Age of Sigmar. And then he went up 60 points. I'm like, what on earth? So I'm going to save that point until one of your lists, because we're actually going to bring it up. And here he is. Here's Brock. Woo. So for those who are joining us on a podcast later on, this is a Barak Nar list: Rule the Sky, Triumph, your articles are Master the Sky, Prosecute Wars with All Haste, and there's no reward without risk. You got Brock, you've got Etheric Navigator, which is the general, Grunstock, and Voidstone as the artifact, Endron Master with Endron Harness, Arcanaut Admiral, Celestial Burst Grenade, and the Aspect of the Champion, Leadership of the Alpha. 9 Endron Riggers, 10 Grunstock Thunderers, 1 Gun Hauler, 2 Frigates, one having the both having heavy cannon, one being the Omni Scope at 1920. So this is all wrapped up in Battle Reg and Commanding Entourage. So this is a 5-drop. Lots of wounds. Well, lots of wounds for a KO army. 103 wounds.
Yeah. So let's talk about Brock, since we were mentioning earlier. If you're going to play Barak Nar, it's because you're investing in Brock. Like, it's very hard to argue you get a lot of value of Barak Nar if you don't take Brock. So 2 things about Brock: he's a War Master for Barak Nar, so it's an additional, in terms of protection for CP generation. He also has the same mechanic as the Admiral for run, charge, shoot, and for boats, but he gets to give it to 3 boats, I think, anywhere on the table, which is really cool.
It's as long as they're outside of 3 inches of all enemies.
So. It's just really nice to have in terms of command ability. And we'll talk more about why it's really nice, because it really synergizes with the articles, the amendments, and so forth. But really, his value is like, firstly, his shooting prowess is the exact same as a frigate. When you look at his actual output and shooting, it's literally almost the same as a frigate, except his is 18-inch range, versus a frigate is 12-inch range. Don't know why, but they decided to word it that way. He's like because he hits the cannon 3s and wounds on I think 2s as well on the cannon shot. He's just basically a frigate in terms of average of like damage. And his 6 shots are the exact same as 4 shots from a frigate. Like he's a frigate with guns, basically. And then mechanically speaking, he has a decent melee profile, nothing to write home about. But then when you look at his ability to give an extra attack to all Baraknar Skyfarer units, if there are wholly even 12 of them after he makes a charge, he's basically Chattakar from Soulblight. It's really interesting because it affects him, it affects the Admiral, it affects the Endrin Master, it affects the Endrin Riggers he comes with. Like, on all of a sudden, you're having like a ton of attacks out of all these kind of high quality attacks. We're talking about Ren 2, Ren 1, 3 damage, D3 damage. Like, it's just like, keep in mind, like in this build, you're putting all of them into one frigate, the one of the Omniscope. So you're going to get to strike first with everything after you charge with that and you disembark all of them. And so like you're basically playing eels with guns. That's the way I describe this list. You're playing Deepkin eels, like old school eels with guns. And then the other frigate basically houses the navigator and the Thunderers, whose job is to effectively pick off another flank at range and not have to overly commit to the board edge. But like Thunders are, I think, had a major glow up in the book. I still think they're all too expensive for what they do, but the special weapons, the way they are now, they're very good in terms of like what they used to be. So
yeah, the fact I feel like the frigate changes have really unlocked Brock and what you just talked about. Like, you have never really wanted to get into melee. It's not really been a focal point. And, Brock even does D3 mortal wounds in combat after he's fought as well. So in addition to the +1 attacks, in addition to everything you've just spoken about, and you're right, there's a bunch of Rend. The Grunson boat does D3 +3 damage. There's 2 damage on the 6 attacks from the charter, D3 damage from the 4 attacks with Ren 2 from the saw. He's got a pretty solid profile. 8 wounds, 3 up save. You could Finest Hour him before he goes crashing in. Or if you stay in combat, you can on the defense you do Finest Hour. Or as someone said to me recently that I'm going to steal from them from now on, it's their birthday. I'm like, I like that.
I will say Brock is very armored for a guy who just was born. Or if you mean like, no, I mean he is technically carried in a baby carriage, so I guess it is his birthday. So mechanic, it's weird to me because I used to play this more of with a KG playstyle KO, but I still try to engage in combat as often as, because I was always fishing for the additional mortal wound output from either dropping bombs in the combat phase or the ram charges. But now this army just does that natively, like between the movement mortal wounds, because mechanically speaking, that frigate that Brock is on is a 16-inch with the Endrin Riggers, the Admiral, and the Endrin Master is a 16-inch movement frigate that has a 2d6-inch run. So in case you're like, you know what, I don't need to shoot the Endrin Riggers or any of the characters inside, I could run it 2d6 and it gets to shoot and charge. Oh, and when I do charge, it's a 3d6, which I can easily reroll with a command point. So all of a sudden that frigate, even if it just moves 16, is like a 3d6 reach. And then if it makes any charge, the entire package inside is incredibly deadly to basically a lot of armies. And even if you don't necessarily want to use it as a way to kill things, like all the characters being inside, you can lock up multiple enemy units. And so the activation games gets really hard for them to just be like, I'm stuck in combat with these stupid idiot dwarves. And then when it's their hero phase, you're like, oh, I'm going to activate the Admiral in your hero phase and I'm going to swing him. You're getting like maximum value out of like just unloading that frigate in your opponent's line. Even if you don't kill the things you're looking for, like it completely disrupts their game plan. And then you still have a frigate full of thunderers just like raining hell upon them, after that. So
yeah, it's an absolute mobile Death Star, and I love it. I love it. Quick one before we move on to the other unit choices, because Flamingo Pie's asked actually quite a good question, is what about double battle reg? Could you do double battle reg with this setup, and why would you go 5 drops when you could go 2?
So sadly, you can't unless you broke the Thunders into 2 units, because you need 4 units that are not basically frigates. So to get it to a 2 bat reg, you'd have to drop the Thunders into 2 units of 5, or the Ending Riggers into unit of 6 and unit of 3, which is not like you're not losing that much. I prefer the bigger block of Thunders because of Unleash Hell, because of All Out Attack, because I usually save All Attack for them in the first place, more than I save it for the actual boats, especially since it's free from the general because he's the ex-Gunstruck. So that's why it's not lower drop. And honestly, I really like having, we talked about it earlier, the Void Stone and the Celestial Burst Grenade. Those artifacts like are really prep you for whatever kind of matchup you're going to meet in the meta, which is either is a super highly durable Squigherds with 5-up ward, or being able to stop Skagrok's teleportation spell, or is it going to be able to stop Teclis's 5-up ward? Like having the Voice on is like, I feel like super valuable in whatever matchup you play in a GT, even if you don't use it.
Is it fair to say that KO isn't relying on the low drop game than other factions? Because you've got the mobility, you've got the speed, you've got ways to get, like, for example, like a static, I don't know, Tzeentch or Sentinel build Lumineth is more reliant on having the lowest drops possible
to dictate. Yeah, and so like I think the change in my mental framework was when they added the claim battle tactic, where now there's an incentive for me to not even try to deploy on points, and I can just ignore the point and deploy as conservatively as I can possibly do without actually being out of reach for my opponent. Because while the one frigate is with all the melee, basically the melee star gets to 2d6 run and then 3d6 charge, the other one can just sky high and then just go wherever it's to unload its guns. Basically, you got a shooting one, and then you got a really melee one. So, like, even though you lost Sky High on the entire army, like having a frigate that moves 16 with 2d6 run and then 3d6 charges, it's pretty much almost the entire table in the current environment. It's very fast.
Yeah. And even though you lost your range, like the tables have gotten smaller, so it's not that big. One more question before I get you to continue on the list, because I think it's again a really good one. Since we talked about the Death Star, so Death Star being that you got this bubble of concentrated power, being that you've loaded up your ironclad or your frigates. For anyone who doesn't know the terminology that we're talking about, but the discussion here or the question here is about: is it a risk or is it dumb to put all your eggs in one basket? Because if you load up this frigate and then it's just 3d6 charging, you're putting all your buffs on it, you're putting all your troops in it. Is it dumb to put all your eggs in one basket?
I think it's most of the time, I think that's a right assumption in most armies. But the way I look at it, when I put all these eggs in one basket, and I hinted at that earlier, is if I do engage my opponent's army early in the game with the things inside, it's not because I'm trying to necessarily kill the things I'm trying to hit. I'm trying to disrupt his game by locking things into combat. Like, it's not they're hard to remove, but they're durable enough to just be like, if my opponent deployed incorrectly, I can make it very painful for him to have to pile in and try to engage things. It's fundamentally, it's very disruptive to my opponent's game plan. And to be honest, like the 6 games I've played so far, it's not been super punishing for approaching the game that way. And maybe it's because most people are not yet practiced against KO, but also it feels that is kind of how KO wants to play now, because of how their battle tactics work, how their output works. And to be honest, you could be all eggs in one basket and be out of range almost at anything in your opponent's army and still be able to reach them. Like, it's very hard for armies to just basically be able to touch the frigates now. If you just play, like, the only army I think I can do it consistently is Beast of Chaos. Like, very easily, like, not have to worry. And if your opponent is a very deep strikey specific army, you can just huddle up your boats and as far as possible, and they want to try to engage you, you can just I'm going to unleash hell with the Thunders and the 2 frigates, or the Thunders and the Endrin Riggers and 1 frigate because of leadership of the Alpha. Like, it's more like you're trying to fetch your opponent, making your opponent make a misplay, and then if you do overcommit, it's about disrupting more and less about killing things. because I have played against New Cornubit, and I basically locked down Scarbrand and Bloodthirster with one Admiral because he wasn't able to pile in and swing to the Admiral, but he was locked into 3 inches of combat with him. So you can find those. It's very easy to find those little small pockets of those heroes because you get to disembark 3 inches out of your frigate, and then you get to pile in 3 inches once you get, actually activate them. You can really squeeze that pain or misdeployment effectively.
And half of that is also on you as the player. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So if I play, let's say, for example, I'm the KO player and I come to a tournament and I'm up against a Stormcast player and they've got, I don't know, let's say 3 units of long strikes that are reinforced and they put them in the sky. They can come down and shoot me off and shoot me and do all the stuff, right? So in that situation, the decision would be not to put all the eggs in one basket. But for most ones, I mean, you've got the option, which I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So you will learn over time when is a good time to do it and when you don't time to do it, or look for those things like if this person can turn 1 charge me, maybe don't do it. If I don't have these things on, don't do it.
It's hard to argue. It's hard to argue with leaving units out of the boats because of how good the boats are defensively for the units inside the boats. And that's the only thing the penalty you get is if the boat dies. You have on a model that model dies, right? That's the biggest penalty. But to be honest, the upside of defensively sitting in the boat against like long strikes is still better than nothing. If he's choosing to shoot the units inside the boat, you're like, whew, he's not shooting the boat.
Because they're -1 to hit, they get +1 save. So yeah.
And it's really, they're fishing for 6s if they're to snap your heroes, because they're -2 to hit the heroes if they're because they're within 1 inch or 3 inches of. They can't even shoot the heroes unless they're sharpshooter most of the time. So, they're probably shooting the boat, which is they're pretty chunky. Frigates are pretty chunky now, 3-up save and 50 wounds. Like they're not what they used to be. This is a Dwarden grunge right now. They don't make frigates like they used to. They made them better.
No. Plus you can obviously all add defense as well. So Anyway, basically our point is it's not as dumb as it might appear. At least in KO. It's actually not a bad decision.
Yep. That's my argument.
Cool. And Kevin saying you can't unleash hell multiple times with leadership of the alpha. I can't remember what Jeremy said, but if that is if Jeremy said that's anyway.
I can't wait somebody to prove me wrong. I love to prove wrong. That's how I grow as a person.
Oh, look, when you're in this much level of detail, it's so hard to remember every little thing. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so you've got your Admiral, you've got your how does the rest work? Like, without going into the weeds of every little decision, like what are the combinations? What are you trying to achieve? Like, how does this list actually work?
Yeah, sure. So when we talked about mostly the fury roading of the frigate into your opponent's base with all the combat stuff, but for the most part, the one thing that is really nice is the Endrinriggers having this basically 4-up rally mechanics for healing boats, which is really powerful. It really helps give you this additional durability throughout the game. It's like I'll be honest, I think I've had multiple opponents say this is probably the most broken mechanic I think they've seen in a long time outside of Gits. Just basically so many times where the fury roading the frigate and the Endrinriggers and the frigate is down to 1 or 2 wounds and just retreats in the sky high, and the Endrinriggers back into it and then just heals it up to full, and the next 2 following turns and you're like, this is stupid. But for the most part, it plays this kind of you use the Thunder boat to basically pick up a flank or remove the screen. And then you use the Admiral with the Endrinriggers. He gives them the extra rend for once per game, and then you just basically unload them into whatever additional unit you're actually trying to get to, or try to finish off the secondary screen to set up. And then you just basically commit the Fury Road boat to just get to fight the soft goodness inside the opponent's army, because it's really hard for armies to just deal with a bunch of crazy maniacs or rend to D3 and redamage that get to strike first. It's just Against a lot of armies I play now into, like outside of Gits, I've seen the army just basically pick up things. It's really problematic. But for the most part, yeah, that's how I play. It just sits on objectives, one frigate, the other frigate plays the disruption game plan, and then you try to use stake a claim early because what's his name? Opening salvo is a little bit risky to do, so you try to do stake a claim early. And if you can't do stake a claim early, then you got a backup of cunning maneuver or stake a opening salvo. But for the most part, that's how the army plays. It's like one is a shooting Death Star and the other is a melee Death Star. And once you commit the melee Death Star and let's say it survives a whole double turn situation, then you can just back up in your boat and just go back to playing a more traditional KO game. Just shoot your opponent and then sit on points.
So
and that's how the army plays.
So does Brock, the engine riggers, go into the frigate with the omniscope? Thunderers go into the other frigate, and then the
frigate holds 12 models. So you got 9 of the engine riggers, and then you can have 3 more characters in it. You have the Admiral, Brock, and the engine master. And then the navigator goes with the Thunderers in the second frigate.
Cool. Just trying to work out your decision tree and who goes where and why.
Yeah. It's not obvious when you just look at it on paper, for sure.
No, love it. Anything else you'd call out about this list, or should we go to your one drop?
Honestly, making it more drops is probably better. You can going into one of the arguments I would say is I like there's a version of this where I'm running sharpshooter, and I think sharpshooter is very good in KO. Do not undervalue sharpshooter in there. So no, that's the only additional comment I would make about it.
All right, let me quickly pause you on that one. Let's say hypothetically I was going to make this list a sharpshooter. What tweaks would you make in the list? Like, would you have more? Like, how would you do it? Like, obviously you'd need a third unit selection to go into the shooter.
Yep. I would probably swap leadership of the Alpha into the Navigator, and then I would do the two Gunstruck gun Thunders to be 2-man units, 2 5-man units, and then just split them in half. So that way you have 2 different ways to target GCs from one boat, and then you put the engine rigger into the third slot for a sharpshooter. And then they can that's really why the drill launchers are also useful for, because they're 50 range and they sometimes can really punish a small, let's say a quick boss and it gets less, right? Just like having a random 6 roll and you're like, cool, 3 mortal wounds. And then and then obviously the guns from the end riggers are also very good at picking up small JC units, especially with the extra Ren from the Admiral.
Cool. So the list wouldn't change much. It's more just the structure, and obviously split the Thunderers out, but you wouldn't have to change anything. But
no.
What does change is this Barrack Zilfin list. So this is an alternative approach with a 1-drop. So if you want to play a bit more of the classic 1-drop style, go in and hit the opponent hard and hope for the double turn. We've got this Barrack Zilfin list, which has got the Admiral with the Burst Grenade again, the Navigator, which is the General with the Stormcaller and Leadership of the Alpha, Engine Master with Engine Harness, 9 Engine Riggers, 9 Engine Riggers, a Frigate, and one has the Omniscope, one has the Malefic Sky Mines, all have the heavy sky cannons.
Yeah. It's old KO, but just more punchy. That's the way you describe this list. I mean, it's a 1-drop. Zilfin is probably the easiest way to get 1-drop into KO. And it just plays very much similar to the old style. It tries to play KG in the first half. And then as soon as you can commit, you're dropping 9 engine riggers or 18 engine riggers in your opponent's face to strike first. It's very hard they shoot well and they punch so well as well. Mechanically speaking, they also it makes it hard for armies like Zinch or Helen that can't necessarily pick up a frigate in the shooting phase easily, because you can just heal it up to full almost immediately from both end riggers, within 3 inches of the same frigate. It plays a very kind of more conservative play style than the previous list, but it is also a very good way of because you're going to be wanting to go second most of the time because you're going to be punishing your opponent for if you get a double turn situation, you're like, cool, like now I can unload the 18 engine riggers after I kind of like whittle down your screens or your crucial elements out of like, I need that. And then now I'm going to charge you with 3 frigates that do effectively, potentially, let's say 4, 8, 12 mortal wounds across all 3 of them on Verge. And then on top of the 12 mortal wounds they could do in the movement. And we didn't really talk about this previous list, but one of the things I forgot to mention because we didn't talk about the Navigator is the reason why KO can sit so conservatively is because of the Navigator. The Navigator gives KO units during the hero phase an ability, potentially, to move D3 plus 3 inches in the hero phase. And having that commensurate lets you reroll dice because it's only on 6s out of 6 dice. If you roll multiple 6s, you can move a boat for each 6. And that just gets you that additional speed where it just lets you basically get into bombing range of units and also like sit comfortably out of threat range of things. And it's fairly like there's only like a 9% chance you don't roll either a 1 or 6 on those 6 dice. With the rerolls, it's even less than that. It's like 4.5%. And if you choose to use 1s instead of the 6s, it just allows you to do D3 mortal wound enemy unit and have its movement speed, which is still very good. So Navigator gets you a lot of mileage in both those lists, basically by putting you defensively out of range, and then they give you that extra boost to get back into range effectively.
Yeah, the utility value alone, I would always take a list with a Navigator. If I was building a list, a Navigator would always be in my list. And if it meant dropping between Code Right or Navigator, it's Navigator every day. Yeah.
And that's why one of the things too, you don't even have to take that command trait on the Navigator. You can go into any other hero. It doesn't have to be the Navigator with that command trait. It's just like if you have that command trait anywhere on the board, you get to reroll any of the dice. It doesn't have to be the Navigator, which is really cool as well.
All right. To bring us home, I'm going to ask you a bunch of rapid fire questions from the community.
Sure.
Are you ready?
Fuck yeah.
Are you ready? All right.
Yeah.
Where do you stand with Balloon Boys? Riggers or Sky Wardens seem to have a close profile.
And Riggers. The healing is too good. It's just too good.
How would you characterize the shift in play styles from the old book to the new book? How is KO players expected to pilot to give themselves the best opportunity to win games?
I think KO players are going to take a lot more risk to win games now, which is probably good for the meta because it's more engaging for your opponent as well to play an army that's actually wants to fight you. But that's how KO plays now. It actually had the ability to just punch up, not just punch down. So, like I said earlier, it's more of a melee army of guns and less of an army that teleports around with guns, basically.
Do you wish you had actually had like a melee focus unit, like something that could go in and commit properly and grind, or are you happy with what you got?
I think I mean, you can't complain about the efficiency of end riggers in terms of melee prowess, so I'm very happy with what they have. I don't think the book needs grindy, and it's not how they want the army to play anyway, so by design. So I think, yeah, it's very good, period. I don't want to change look.
What do you expect will be our hardest matchups, and how do you expect to counter them? What matchups do you think will be in our favor, and what we think will likely to win?
Yeah, squig gits are always going to be a problem because they just have the resilient wound density to just sit on points and not even have to engage you and just watch you scream on top of your lungs as you're trying to kill like 200 models of gits. Trolls are going to be fairly easy, I think, for KO to lift and pick up. Bach are going to be, Beast of Chaos are probably going to be fairly hard for KO because the way they mechanically can do mortal wounds and charge you point blank, it's going to be challenging because you can't really defensively set up for that. And then finally, I think Slaves of Darkness are going to be probably an easy matchup as well. It's just mostly because having the ability to do the amount of Rend 3 volume shooting you can put to the table, and then all this chip damage, plus on top of the strike first melee attacks, which are all Rend 2 multi-damage, gets really challenging for Vanguards to get a lot of value. Yes, they can be fast. Yes, they can try to reach you. But, you usually as KO player, you get to dictate the first engagement more than not. So I think that's, the more traditional Slaves of Darkness lists are going to have a problem against KO, I think. And then in terms of other armies which have a good chance against KO, we can I still think techless can be a problem, but I don't think hell on techless can be a problem. Like when we're talking about like Geometrica, like ignoring all your rend is really good. Having a 5 ward aura that may be unstoppable is super good, and then having the AoE mortal wound mechanics is super punishing to the boat list because you have so many X's we talked about into one basket. So anything that can like basically do split, like we'll talk about like Vexillors and Stormcast. Vexillors and Stormcast are bloody terrifying to KO armies, just because if you're playing a boat list, they'll just hammer you to the ground with more wounds. And just the units inside. The boats are probably going to get healed up in the end of Grieger, so it doesn't really matter. But the units inside will get punched.
Yeah, you're talking about the 5 Vexillor list that just does rains of mortal wounds and Comet comes down and all that stuff.
Yep.
A unit of 9 Sky Wardens and a frigate is almost 700 points. 15 Thunderers and an Ironclad is over 900 points, and over 1,000 when you include a Chemist. With a large amount of points sunk in the boats and the threats, how would you fill out the rest of the list? So obviously we've shown a couple of examples, but I guess if people are starting with either the Sky Wardens and the frigates or the Thunderers and the Ironclads, what's some of the theory behind filling out the rest of your list? Maybe is the question there.
I think I want to build a KO list. I wanted to compartmentalize it into doing one specific job. Like I like the disruption gameplay. That's what we used to take in the bottle a lot of the time. It had that weird disruption mechanic you could do with either half movement or not so much the purple sun, which went in more. So when I approach list building, I like to compartmentalize the KO list to, okay, I need this compartment to be able to do this. I need this compartment to be able to do this. But for the most part, it comes down to how am I going to before it was that like, how am I going to play on objectives and still be able to score the objectives? But nowadays the army is translated more into how am I going to get on the objectives without getting punched back? Basically, as we talk about this, because the army doesn't have the durability to necessarily hit, take the counterattack. So you got to find ways to like either body blocks a boat or just remove things that could counter hit. But like for the most part, you need to designate each boat to do something specific and something like to do well, basically. I personally have not built any of the non-boat lists. I'm sure they're probably gonna find a way to exist, and I hope they do. But I just prefer the boat. They're just so much more fun. So,
no, that's a good one. A couple more. What's your stance on Thunderers? 5-man squads, 15-man squads, range 12 weapons, or only 18s? I'm just quickly pulling up to see how that makes sense.
You'll notice in one of my lists, I had 10 Thunderers. I think 10 is probably 2 units of 5 or a unit of 10 is probably most I would spend in 2 Thunderers at any given point in time. I really like the cannons. The cannons are fantastic. They're 18-inch range. The fumigators are also one of my new favorite weapons they have. Because of the auto hits, but because at the end of the combat they do mortal wounds, which is another. We talked about this. More mortal wounds, multiple phases is very good for KO. And then finally, I like to just like those 2 weapons and the rifles are just good enough. I've tried the deck sweepers. They're fun. They're also good if you're not playing sharpshooter. But if you're playing sharpshooter, you probably don't want the deck sweeper. You want the extra range to really reach the JCs. So I think 10 is about as good as it gets for Thunderers.
Couple more questions. Do you feel that you are durable enough sounds like you've got a fan because they've actually quoted you. They've said you've described them as a combat army with shooting.
Yeah, that's definitely how it plays now. For me, at least, that's how I approach the game. And I got a lot of practice against Matt Beasley, which is a local in Seattle who plays Zinch a lot. And he hates KO so much, I've given PTSD out of all the practice games we played. So not because of his shooting, but because of the ability to just fight in combat on top of its shooting. It's just super infuriating for him to deal with.
Yeah, KO's always been a great castle breaker too. Like you always have the perfect nut to crack those. Is the Incantor a worthwhile ally to save on an artifact slot?
I think so. It's so the problem I have the ally selection for me is that every time you take an ally, you're taking less guns and you're taking less melee threats, because that's how the army is now. It's like everything you invest in a frigate is potentially a melee threat unit. So anytime you pick an ally, you're sacrificing those points. Not to say like there isn't points in fact to be removed from the list. And I think the Incantor is probably one of the few exceptions. Like, yeah, it's nice to have that as a, not so you don't have to invest in the Voidstone artifact slot for sure.
Two more burning questions and we'll wrap this up. What's the mindset that you think KO players are going to need for this new book?
I think most of the new old and new KO players are going to have to get used to the fact that sometimes you're going to have to go for a Hail Mary. Because it's like, especially the old KO players, we wanted really to play an army that was very much not engaging your opponent. New KO does not want to do that. It wants to engage. So you're gonna have to make peace with that reality. So sometimes a charge that looks really risky has to be very calculated, and it can make the difference between you winning the game on turn 4 or you winning the game on turn 3 in some cases for KO. So that's KO players are gonna have to feel a lot better about charging, basically what the moral of the story is.
Abel mentioning, I always wanted to charge, now I can.
Yeah. It's night and day from the two books. The previous book was like, well, you charge, you're not very good at it. Now it's like, if you charge, you're pretty bloody good at it.
Well, it's like, because the old bomb racks as well, like you wanted to be charged. You're like, okay, I'm going to shoot you, and if you charge me, I'm going to drop some bombs on you. But if you don't charge me, I'm just going to keep shooting at you.
Yeah. And by the way, like we're saying this within the context, we're talking about frigates, because that's the problem. The Ironclad is it does not have the disembark mechanic that the frigates do, and that's why it's left in the dust by the frigate, basically. So,
actually, let me add a second last question, because this is on the list. Do you still run do you still run Ironclads, or are we all about frigates now?
I'm trying to find a reason to run an Ironclad. I haven't found one. Like, honestly, like I'd rather just have more frigates. Now, I will say if the battle scroll or whatever HP comes out and they point adjust, where the Ironclad comes out, let's say 50 points and frigates go up like 20 points, then I think it's arguable that you might want like, especially that Thunder block I have, might want to sit in an Ironclad over a frigate. But it's hard. Like, frigates just do so much more now than the Ironclad even does with the extra shots it has. Just consistently, like, it fights better on points than the Ironclad would ever would. So,
and I think that's my feeling again with the gun haulers. The gun haulers, just for a little bit extra points, I can upgrade to a frigate. It's like, it's hard to justify, but like again, in the future, if points adjust, then that might be the trigger to bring back in the Ironclad or reduce the amount of frigates. I think one frigate's probably the healthy spot, but right now, abuse it. I'm a Gits player. I'm gonna run all of my Squig Herd while I can.
Yes, do it.
The mighty nerf.
It's the philosophy of any video game. If the developers let you have an exploit early and exploit often until they fix it. So.
Listen, you and I have like a kindred spirit. KO and Gits have been struggling for years now. Like, you can do good builds, but like, this is our time in the sun. We're going to enjoy it while it lasts. Get sunburnt from the glory and the tears of our opponents.
Yeah, the difference is, like, I'd rather lose 2 squigs than having to force my opponent to fight KO. Like, I feel bad. I don't even bring KO to like my weekly games because it's just like the army is so efficient. I feel bad. So, it's probably the same you probably feel by Gits.
now it feels engaging though. I must admit, at least now KO is a much more engaging game, and that was one of the things that I enjoyed the most, was that I feel like we're going to have a good interactive game. Not can I absorb your damage and then punch you back, and whoever does like that arm wrestle wins. It's at that one point in the turn.
Right. Yeah, it's going to take a moment for the meta to adjust to how Go players play now.
Yeah. Last burning question, then we'll bring it home, is a good one, actually. I really, really like this one. And there's 2 parts to it, and it's probably the second part of the question I'm more interested in, is how do you use KO on the tabletop? And I think you've kind of described that. But the second part, which is more important, is how do you plan to crack some of the top meta armies at the moment?
All right, so in terms of Tzeentch, I have a lot of games under my belt, and I feel pretty good that just the way the army plays just kind of just wins against Tzeentch. In terms of Gits, I think and I've talked a lot about this because a lot of people are still on the fence between the low drop versus the high drop KO. I think to play against Gits in the way they exist, you have to play the high drop variant with Sharpshooter. You have to be able to pick off the squig bosses and some of the elements that buff the squigs early in the game, and then hope you can take their squigs with just a Ren 1 attack over the mortal wound. The mortal wound is the big problem. It's not so much the squids, Ren 1. And then, that's kind of how I would approach the game style. And since the battle tactics of KO are almost equally as easy as the Gits one, you can kind of maintain the point differential to be very small early in the game, and we'll play more defensively. In terms of slaves, I've played multiple games against different slave variants. The Vanguard is obviously the most scary one, but it still didn't feel that bad. Just mostly because once you pick up the Vanguard block, they don't really have anything else to do. Like, they don't have any threats left in the book, so you could just make up the point differentials if you let them, get ahead too early in the game. And then the chosen block approach was like even worse. Like, it's just basically like waiting for its slow, grindy death to basically the KO army. And then once again, Sharpshooter is super important in that matchup, even because you can pick off the sorcerers with the demonic, the 3d6 run and charge very easily. Like the 10 block of Thunderers as a Sharpshooter, or the 2-5 in Thunder. They can just pick up any sorcerer off the table usually by themselves. And then in terms of let's see, I'm trying to think of another. I've only played one game against Bach, and it did not end well because Bach is just such a hard army to lock down with KO, since they don't have to play the game at all, like you. They're basically old KO. They don't have to play the game. They could just sit off the table. Cool.
Because they can null deploy. That null deployment for 2 turns means well, what are you shooting at?
And then when they do come in, they just arrive point blank with Minotaurs, and you're like, awesome. I'm trying to think what other top tier army would you say I would face with KO?
Well, I was just thinking as well, obviously hot off the press, Blades of Khorne and Hedonites of Slaanesh have literally, the battle times have been previewed. Are you concerned, or do you have any thoughts on what new Slaanesh might bring to the table? Because they've got a lot of speed. Khorne has a lot of hitting power. They've got a ward. Demons have a ward of 5 up outside of 8 inches. So there's some good things that, the ward will be negative against you. They can absorb more damage.
Yep. Yeah, so one unit I was very afraid of from Khorne was Skull Crushers, because they have a base natty 2+ save, which really helps you counter some of the KO shooting. But in the games I've played against Khorne, the mortal wound output from just flying over, charge, and then the high ran from the engine riggers has been able to just kind of either clear or whittle down the Skull Crushers. And since I'm faster than them, I can lock them in combat. And they're really not that scary in combat is a problem I've been finding out. They really do their damage output from when they charge. And then in terms of the demons, the problem I have with the demon list is that KO wants to get in your face. So the ward saves against shooting has been it's really good for KO plays defensively, but KO wants to get in that 8-inch aura anyway. So you don't really get the ward saves. And if you do have the ward saves, you still have the KO ability to just say, school, because Scarbrand is sitting too far away from this screen, I can still remove his ward save on a 2-up and then just still shoot him as long as he's within 12 inches of the boat, right? It's things like that. I feel Khorne is at a disadvantage. I don't think it's very single-handedly decided, but I think it is a disadvantage against new KO. Hedonites, I don't know. Hedonites are interesting because they can do so much mortal wounds to my heroes and units without I'm engaging into the game. I want to shoot Enden Riggers at you. Cool, Temptation Dice. That's D3 mortal wounds on them. Continuously doing damage to the guys inside by me doing things. It's actually kind of I think it would be very problematic for KO to deal with for new units.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Slaanesh has 6 temptation dice every turn. If you fail a roll, they can offer you a dice, and that it's a automatic 6 to your hit, wound, or save. If you accept it, you obviously get the 6, and they get some summoning points. and obviously some abilities that come off the back of that.
Yep.
If you decline it, you take the D3 damage. So it's almost like you're better off accepting it, right? And not taking the D3 mortals.
Exactly. But then they're all of a sudden they're -1 to hit in combat, which really hurts the combat mode. And then all of a sudden they're 5-up ward. Like, and mechanically speaking, I think Hedonites might be more problematic than Khorne for KO, basically. And honestly, any army that gets -1 to hit and shooting is going to be or -1 to hit and combat and shooting is going to be very problematic for KO to deal with effectively. I think is what it comes to.
The other call out as well is Scarbrand has a 3d6 charge.
Right.
But if I look at Meta Watch, so currently Disciples of Tzeentch is so just from order of win rate, Tzeentch, Lumineth, Beast of Chaos, Gitz, Flesh Eater Courts, KO, Khorne, Ogres, Cities, Sylvaneth, and then just it's like there's a big fat middle between 54% and 45%. But the ones that are above 55 is Tzeentch, Lumineth, Bok, Gitz, and then Fex at the top. Fex is an interesting one.
Yeah, to be honest, it's because we went away from the monster meta, so Feeding Frenzy is more relevant. So yeah, they've always hit really hard. They don't have to worry about activating Feeding Frenzy. They're gonna do great.
Does Lumineth worry you at all, other than the or how do you defeat them, especially with Techless and the bubble?
So the Techless, so if it's a Helon list, I'm not too worried about the Helon list because I outrange them for the most part, and then they require them to teleport a unit to really get in range. And the problem is the output from a teleporting Sentinel unit isn't enough to pick up any of the individual units, and potentially could pick up a hero, but that's okay because your value in the army isn't from the heroes, it's from the boats and the guys inside. And then the problem is whatever return fire the KO puts into Shining Company, which is still -1, can be they can just lift Sentinels off the table. And then you can just kind of ignore Techless as long as you sit outside of his Mortal Wound aura. And even if you do sit in his Mortal Wound aura, so the problem, the one time I played against Techless, the Helon list, is I was able to shoot off a Sentinel block, charge another unit, disengorge the entire Fury Road frigate, and then just kill Techless in combat. And he was just okay, cool. I guess the game's over. But that's kind of the problem of KO is just it's just such a multi-thread army now that it's hard for these castle builds to design how to play well against it. And then you have the advantage of just having vastly superior battle tactics than do. So there you usually have even if you get tabled by turn 4, you almost have a massive lead over them. As long as you still maintain your strat. So it's just hard for Lumineth.
It's always felt like a little bit like Sons of Behemoth, where you score big early on, and then it's just the attrition of holding that lead as long as possible. But look, I think we've both shown that we could talk forever about Kharadron Overlords, and you are the master when it comes to it's been very insightful, and we haven't even looked at individual war scrolls. This is how knowledgeable Jeremy is. But you have a channel, the link is down below. I want you to give shout outs. I'm surprised you haven't said anything about the Corsairs yet. They'll probably kill you if you don't say anything.
They don't get chance because they can't afford to lose me. I'm indispensable to them.
Hold on, Matt Buck is a Corsair as well, right?
Yeah, he's indispensable too in a different way.
I was just thinking because he was on Warhammer Weekly talking about KO. You're here talking about KO. We just need the Corsairs to do the KO tour.
I 100%, and I can't wait to see what is, because unfortunately Matt's KO army was stolen from him a few years ago, and he's rebuilding it now, and I can't wait to see what he does with it because he's a great artist as well, on top of being a good general. So I can't wait for that. And I will say, for funs and giggles, the reason why I say I'm indispensable, the Sparkle Dev Party tournament we went to in Seattle and Strength, the top 10, there was 4 Corsairs in the top 10, and all of their lists were designed by me, including mine. So, so they don't get a choice. I can say whatever I want.
Last burning question from the chat. You've snuck right in, Brenos. Is there a place for Sky Wardens in Barrack Zon lists, even though you said Edrin Riggeds are superior?
I think so. It's not keep in mind, mechanically speaking, Sky Wardens are just as effective in shooting and melee as Endringers for the most part. The difference is that Endringers bring you that extra healing ability on the boats, which is honestly very good. And then the other restriction that Sky Wardens have is they're 15 points more expensive than Endringers for, I think they're 135 or they're 130. Either way, they're more expensive than Endringers. It's mechanically weird to me. So I don't dismiss Sky Wardens because they're battle line for Barak Zahn, so it's very nice, but it's just hard to argue for, like, you can pay for a 90-point Endrin Master, which is still a really good melee character and his boats, to just have unlocked battle line Endrin Riggers. So it's not that Sky Wardens are out of the equation. It's just that, like, right now Endrin Riggers are just too efficient. If you're not playing a boat list and you're playing a foot list of Barak Zahn, then 100% Sky Wardens are vastly superior than Endrin Riggers. So keep that in mind.
10-point different, by the way. Endrin Riggers are 120, Sky Wardens are 130.
Yeah, I'm shocked at that point differential for both units, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in the near future. I can tell you one of them is going to go up.
Wow. Give some shout outs. Bring us home. Who do you want to shout out? And obviously, again, go subscribe to Jeremy's channel. Link is below. Great content. I highly recommend it. It's not because he's here. I'm subscribed. Legitimately, go watch it.
First off, thanks for the show. Thanks for having me on and talking about KO, which is an army I can talk forever about. Thanks for the audience for putting up with me talking forever about it. Shout out to the Corsairs, Team America. I hope to. I don't know if you'll make it to Worlds this year, Coach, but I can't wait to play Sam Morgan again, your compatriot in Amsterdam. And you guys should, it will be. There will be a lot of content about AOS Wars coming out, and everybody should watch it and help us promote the, this event for everybody. So that's my shout out.
And if the link is not working for you, or if people are on Twitch, they're watching this and they're not on YouTube, what's your channel name so they can search it out? And it's in my Discord as well. So every time Jeremy posts a video, it's published in my Discord. So the name is.
I don't have a cheat name for my channel. It's just Barak Dor. It's just my channel. I'm so bad at this.
Anyone needs a link, leave it. It's in the episode description. We'll fix it up. But search Jeremy's name, Barak Dur, and and it'll come up. But Jeremy, it's dinner time for you. Thank you so much for your time. Chat, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you've got some ideas. If you don't already know this and how we work, this is just one way of playing KO. It's not to say that if you love a certain build, or we didn't talk about Barak Thring and that's your favorite, it's not that it's not competitive. It's just this is what we like and how we're thinking about it. But you do you. Let us know in the comments what you think. Let us know, is there something that we missed, something that you like that maybe you want to tell us why you like it? Leave it in the episode description. Jeremy, love your work. Absolute pleasure. And I apologize. This should have been like 3 years earlier.
You gave me time to build some girth between us.
you and me both. All right, I'll let you go. Have dinner.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a 1-1 on a spellcast.